Lamplight Audiobooks presents Daughter of the Tide by Leah Fleming, narrated by Fiona McNeill. Part 1.
Blow the wind southerly, southerly, southerly. Blow the wind south o'er the bonny blue sea. Blow the wind southerly, southerly, southerly. Blow, bonny breeze, my lover to me. They told me last night there were ships in the offing, and I hurried down to the deep rolling sea. But my eye could not see it, wherever might be it, the bark that is bearing my lover to me.
Chapter 1. Cofetrish, 1930. The girl scampered over the grass, stubbing her toe on a stone, hopping on one foot, cursing into the wind like Uncle Niall when the cow caught him on the nose. Her mother, Ailey, was standing in the doorway of the stone house, waving a cloth, yelling angrily after the child. "Mind what I'm telling you, Min McPhee. Away for whelks and limpets, a full pail or it'll be a thin stew we'll be getting for the dinner. No dreaming and no singing. We've enough bad luck in this house to last us a lifetime without you calling on the sea witches. And mind, the eye of the Lord sees all, lassie." "I hate you, I hate you," Min shouted into the wind with her fingers crossed. The sting from her admonition was still throbbing on her thighs. She had spilled the precious milk from the cow, broken an egg when she tripped over a stone. Mother had taken the strap to her legs. "If you won't slow down, then you'll be made to slow down, Mulroy. It's for your own good." It was one of Mother's black days, when the mood hung like thunderclouds in the rafters of the Crofter's cottage. Now she must find some seafood, or there would be another admonition. School was out, so at least she was free from the chores in the smoky house. The rain was only dripping, and the shore wind was light. It was time to greet the old seal, sing to the mermaids, and spin stones into the sea. She could fill a pail in minutes, and then go search for eggs in the macher to soothe away Mother's gloom. Min knew where a hen was laying away, and that secret hoard was usually her own spending money. Only Dan the Boo knew about this little arrangement, swapping eggs for licorice dabs and pan drops in his shop. But today she must find a speckled brown egg for Mother's tea. She was making her way down to the old ruined dun, the old fort on the rocks where the limpets clung to the shoreline in clusters. She was good at smashing them off the rocks and scooping up all she could find into her pail, whilst brushing away the flies from her ankles. The seaweed under her bare foot was like dead man's hands clutching her toes. Sometimes the pot was thickened with carrageen. She hated it slithering about, but when she was hungry, anything that filled her belly full was swallowed with her nose scrunched up. Now it was time for the Colonel to make his appearance. He lived somewhere under the rocks, and when she sang, he would bob round into the small bay to admire her performance. He was just an old grey seal, with a kindly eye, but he always came when she called. Today, she was going to sing in English to him, one of the songs they were learning at the school, Mary of Argyll. In her heart, she knew that Gaelic was the real sound of music, but she liked the sad ballads and the jingles about the lords and ladies who always ended up in the kirkyard dead. If only she could practice her songs in the house. But music was forbidden. She used to practice in the cow's byre, but once Mother caught her singing on the Sabbath to the cow and she beat her mercilessly. "I'll have no blasphemers on the Sabbath in this house. And in English too. We have to beat the dark spirits out of you for your own good. Min took her admonitions without a murmur, but her heart was full of rage at the injustice. She had only been singing a school hymn. Mother would not hear a sound of music indoors or in the kirk. Music is the devil's work, my girl. Don't you forget it, no matter what the dominie says or yon fancy minister in the manse. God prefers the spoken word, the silent prayer to all that caterwauling and tonky tunes they have in the hymn books. Music incites the flesh to lust. My word is spoken on the matter. But the bagpipes, mother, Min argued. What of them? The call of the pipes brings only sorrows to a home and to those that follow them. There was no arguing with mother when her black moods filled the kitchen, when she sat in darkness, spinning like a cailleach, muttering curses into the wool. Her face was leathered and lined like old boots, and her hair was white. Her hands were gnarled and coarse. Min could never imagine her young, or having the beauty that Uncle Niall, her brother, once spoke of wistfully. Ailey McPhee never smiled. Min just had to sing. It bubbled and burst up through her in ripples of flame from her chest. She liked to stand square and lift her voice loud into the wind, let it echo around the rocks. If she cupped her hand like a shell on her left ear, she could hear the voice echoing back into her head. Sometimes she could hear the fiddles in her head at the Cayleys and danced around the beach like a dervish spinning until she fell dizzy and laughing. I have heard the mavis singing his love song to the morn. I have seen the dewdrop clinging to the rose just newly born. But Min was shouting by the edge of the shoreline, but for once, Colonel Blimp didn't oblige. Instead, a canoe edged round the rocks, with a boy grinning as he paddled towards her, his black hair flopping over his eyes. How now, brown cow? Is that Minnie McPhee scaring the shoals away again? Shut your mouth, you and do. You've scared away the Colonel with your paddling. Is your sister coming out to play the now? She shook her fist at him. Trust you and do, the dark one, to spoil her game. He was her friend Agnes's big brother and son of the manse. He won all the prizes in the school and would soon be off to the mainland to college for a proper education. Ewan spent his holidays helping the fishermen or living rough on the small offshore islands in his canoe, fishing and camping like a Boy Scout. Agnes said there was nothing he didn't know about the waters, the tides, the secrets of the shoreline, and he drew all the birds for her. He even ate seaweed for the fun of it. Agnes McKinnon was her special friend and lent her storybooks in English to read from her own bookshelves. Min wrapped them in scraps of oilskin and hid them under the boxed bed, for Mother did not approve of novels, as she called them. They were the devil too. At home there was only the big black Bible for Sunday reading. Everything was of the devil in their small cottage on the edge of the Macher. Uncle Niall McPhee, on leave from the ship in his cap and dark reefer jacket, took no interest in Min's upbringing, but sucked on his clay pipe and looked into the peat fire. His hands were tanned on the outside and pink on the inside from years working in salt water. Sometimes she thought she saw him look upon her kindly with a sigh. Poor cailleach, born to shame and no father. But that was usually when he was full of the drink from the boat, or the bothy where it was purchased in secret by even the elders of the kirk when the spirit moved. At least Agnes saw no shame in knowing her, and Ewan just laughed and teased her, making her red-faced with fury. Want a hand with a pail? He asked, lifting his paddles. No, thank you, I've nearly finished, she replied. There's some good ones around the corner. You can squeeze in the back and I'll take you. Min hesitated, but the truth was she was afraid to get aboard in case the canoe might turn over and she'd be flung into the sea. The truth was she couldn't swim and feared the water. Had it not flung Uncle Archie from his lobster boat one tide and thrown his body ashore the next, dashed on the rocks? Far worse, had it not stolen her father away before his wedding, shaming her mother and giving her the black moods, making Min a bastard? She was sure he must have drowned at sea, for no one would ever speak of him. There was always a hushed silence around her birthing day when she, conceived in shame and born in fear, as mother always reminded her, had clung on to life by a whisper. A frail scrap of pink flesh with a pulsing heart through its ribs that refused to be stilled. She was a summer child who was kept indoors in a wooden crate for a cradle until fit to be seen. Mother took praying fits ever since that time, but no Bible words could ever comfort her sorrows. Everyone knew that Fetri men were all for the sea. They called it the Grey Widowmaker, and Fetri women bore the wind and the weariness on their faces. "Come on, I won't bite you, Minnie Mouse," Ewan laughed at her reluctance. "Don't call me that. I can't swim," she confessed. Ewan smiled, his dark eyes sparkling warmly. As big brothers went, Agnes was lucky to have such a gem. "I'll teach you both then," he replied with a grin. "But I'd get wet, and I'll no be swimming in my nothings." Min could feel herself blushing at the very thought. "I should think not. I'm sure Aggie will lend you one of her knitted efforts. She can learn too. Everyone should be able to swim if you live by the water. It makes sense." Min shrugged her shoulders. None of her kin could swim. No one went into the water unless to wash off winter's muck and smoke. There were too many dangers in the water. Sea cailliachs, sirens and evil sprites waiting to lure innocents to their end, and most of them were female. Min knew all the superstitions. "I have to go back with this pail or I'll be for a scalping." Min backed up the shingle to the tide line, and the flies, and the macher. There was just time to search for an egg. She was not going to make a fool of herself in front of Ewan Dhu. Of that she was certain, but she didn't know why. Next to the Struthers, the minister and the dominie were almost gentry. They were the undisputed leaders of Fetri. Ewan would be expected to follow in his father's footsteps, away to university and away from the island. All the clever ones took that path to freedom, and few came back. Only crofters' sons and fishermen stayed. Cotter children with no prospects had little choice in the matter. Even at 10, Min sensed her family's place was at the bottom of the midden heap, last in line for a decent education. They had been pushed to the edge of the sea with just a few chickens and crops to live from the sea as best they could. Somebody had to stay on the island and do the menial jobs: kelping, fieldwork, road mending, fishing and waiting on. That would be her fate, however bright she knew she was. "Yon lass is as quick as a weasel out of a dyke," Uncle Niall would laugh about her as he sat by the lamplight filling his baccy pipe. If she collected every hidden egg on the island, her savings would never be enough to get away from Fetri. Mother said McPhees were cursed if they left the island, but Uncle Niall could go and come as he pleased. It was his stone cottage with the turf roof weighed down with stones and nets that sheltered them from the gales that whipped across the island. The message was drummed into her skull and beaten into her thighs. Those that were conceived in fear and born in shame must never leave this shore. Ballinottar Point. Ewan McKinnon kept his promise to the Cotter girl, and on the next fine day he brought his sister Agnes down to the shore to meet Min, teaching them both to swim. There was lots of screaming and splashing around, for the girls were fearful of the waves and the cold sea. "Move your arms like me," he demonstrated, prostrate on the sand, aping the breaststroke and kicking frog-like shapes with his legs, sending grains and shells in all directions. The girls giggled as they practiced their strokes in the sand. He took them to the safe open bay with a long slope into deep water where they could wade and feel their feet on the sand. The sea was blue and inviting, and the waves were just ripples. They changed modestly in the sand dunes, the heat of the summer sun stinging the soles of their feet. Min McPhee was already a head taller than Agnes McKinnon. Ewan could not help but notice the tiny breast buds filling out her knitted swimsuit where Agnes was still flat and undeveloped. Patiently he trawled each in turn through the water so they could practice their leg strokes, and then he clasped them round the waist. Then it was time for the girls to jump onto the water and thrash towards his waiting hand. In deeper water, he held them by the chin so they could feel the buoyancy of being held up by the sea. Agnes was not so well coordinated as her friend and trembled at the thought of letting go of his grasp. She thrashed and sank, afraid to float. "You must let go," he urged her. "Float on your back and let your arms gently paddle. You are the boat and your arms and legs are your rudder. If you can float, you will always be safe in calm water. Go on, Min, you can do it." Ewan was shouting encouragingly, holding on to her tiny waist. Min lay back stiffly. I can't. Look, I'm hardly holding you." Her teacher was lifting her like a waiter holds a tea tray. "Just float out of my hands. Head to the sky." He watched Min's eyes, distrustful at first, blinking back her fear. "See, you can do it." She was fixing her gaze trustingly onto his own dark eyes. "I'm watching you. You're floating now." Her silver blue eyes stared intently at him, hardly believing she was afloat, gently bobbing away from his arms. "Me next!" yelled Agnes, breaking the spell between them. "It's my turn now." The moment his attention turned to his sister, Min capsized, gulping in a mug of salt water. "You made me sink!" She managed to turn and thrash back to safety. Agnes wanted his attention, making Ewan grab her knitted costume straps like a harness. "Come on, you can do better," he yelled. Over the weeks, he watched them both grow more confident, swimming a little further each time, so their feet no longer touched the sand. He warned them never to swim unsupervised, or in any other place than the safe shelving shores of Kilfetrish Bay. The Fetri coast was treacherous, and the currents unpredictable. Once they could swim, Ewan felt it was safe for them to come out in the dinghy alongside him. Min kept whining that she had never left the island and begged for trips further out to sea. "I can swim back to the shore," she boasted. "You'll do no such thing. There are jagged rocks hidden under the surface at high tide waiting to trap you. Have you never heard of the sea hags of Ardnag Point? They lie in wait to lure silly girls on the rocks who disobey orders. Just because you can swim does not mean you can outrun the tides," warned Ewan. Then his father, the Reverend John McKinnon, took his son to task for spending so much time with two young girls, his moustache twitching as if there was something faintly indecent about these activities. "You mustn't single out one of my parish poor, giving her ideas above her station. It has come to my attention you've been cavorting half naked over the sands, and you, almost a man now, sprouting bodily hair." The minister was wagging his finger as if he disapproved that Ewan's height was already outstripping his own. "I'm just teaching my sister and her friend to swim," Ewan argued. "Where's the harm in that, sir?" "Whatever for? They're not going to be fishermen." I would have thought all civilised people need to know how to swim, especially on an island. Ewan felt his cheeks flushing at this dressing down. Your mother doesn't want Agnes near boats. Her chest is weak and exercise will exhaust her. It would not be wise to continue these lessons for your own good. If you must go down to the sea, make yourself useful on the harbour. Help collect in the lobster creels. Do I make myself plain? Stay away from the McPhee girl. She was born to trouble, that one. John McKinnon wagged his pulpit finger again. Yes, sir. Ewan bowed his head to his father's will. What was wrong with Agnes's friend? Minna might only be a rough quarter child, but she had shown courage in overcoming her fear of the water. Now she swam like a mermaid, with trailing white hair. She made Agnes rock the boat with laughter when she sang to the seals. He could see no harm in their friendship at all. 3 weeks later, towards the end of the summer, Ewan was rowing off Ballinotter Point, checking the lobster pots, when he spotted the 2 girls on the shore waving to him, beckoning him to heave to. He had been careful to obey his father's wishes, leaving his sister to her games. Now they were playing tag on the shingle, and jumping out of the sand dunes in a makeshift slide, dancing and waving. He paused to watch them, envying them their friendship, for he had always been a loner. No one wanted to play with the minister's son. Each time he had made a friendship, his father moved on to another parish, and Ewan was forced to start all over again. He found companionship amongst fishermen in boats, watching the sea creatures and birds, sketching them in charcoal in a sketchpad. The water around his boat was calm enough, but further out he could sense the sea was strengthening and soon breakers would be forming. He could read the wind and the waves, and he was uneasy. Ewan watched the girls stripping off their skirts and shoes, racing towards the water, leaving clumps of clothing dotted along the beach. Min was shouting, "We're coming in! We're going to walk on water like Jesus!" "No! Not here! Go back at once! It's further than you think!" he yelled out to them, standing up, forcing his voice above the swell, rocking his own boat in his anxiety to warn them. Their 2 heads bobbed in unison as they ploughed towards his boat against a racing tide. Ewan's heart was pounding with fear as he watched helplessly. They hadn't the strength to swim against the tide to reach his boat. The stupid pig-headed kids. Had he not warned them? "Go back now!" he screamed into the wind. His arms were burning as he rowed like a galley slave, letting the current push the vessel inshore, trying to race the glassy, heaving swell. Ballinotter Cove was edged with fingers of rock and steeply shelving. The Atlantic rollers roared and crashed onto these rocks when the sea was angry. Each rise of the swell pushed him further out to reach them. "Go back! Agnes, go back!" Ewan's seagull screams were useless. He was praying out loud, but the god of the swelling tide was deaf to his pleas. The roar of the rising water in his own eardrums drowned out any voice he might have. The girls were in deep water now and tiring fast. "Float on the water, for God's sake! Let the tide take you back!" He willed them to hear his command. His arms were useless propellers against the current. He strained to keep their heads in view, but the waves were breaking over them, and the white spume engulfed them, and they kept disappearing. There was no time to panic, for a huge, unexpected wave crashed over his boat, hurling him into the water, throwing him up into the air and flinging him helplessly towards the shore. He could feel the grit under his feet and stood shaking to see where the girls were heading. In slow motion, he saw the dark head of his sister bobbing helplessly, drifting to the finger posts of jagged rocks. He saw in horror her tiny body thrown up onto the rock like a limp rag doll as over and over the waves played with their toy, dashing it against the rock until it disappeared, wedged in some gully out of reach. He thrashed out in that direction, but his arms were like lead weights and would not turn. His strokes were powerless to propel him forward. He was thrown once more onto the sand where he gasped for breath. Why was there no one on the shore to help him? Where was Min? Then he saw the girl rise up on the crest of a mighty wave, propelled lifeless onto the shore. He was half crawling with exhaustion, dragging her from the edge to safety. He pumped the water from her lungs. "Live, you stupid Kalak!" he prayed, hoping he was lost in some nightmare. He turned her face down, lifting her arms in the only way he knew until she coughed and sicked up the seawater. With relief, he saw her face was turning pink and she gasped for breath. He left her to recover, yelling for help. Surely someone was around. Then he caught sight of his own upright boat coming in on the roaring tide, unbroken, and he threw himself in the water to launch himself towards the rocks where Agnes had last been seen. He was crying with panic. I must find her. She must still be wedged safely into some rock. Agnes, I'm coming. Ewan bobbed up and down on the water in pursuit of his boat. The damned thing was elusive, drifting beyond grasp. But he swam on like an automaton, using every last ounce of strength in his body, until he grabbed the side and hauled himself in. Then the sky went dark, and he could no longer feel his limbs. He lay too exhausted to care if he lived or died at the mercy of the cruel tide. Then there were voices and arms and other strong hands pulling at him, dragging the boat back to shore. My sister, I have to find her. Over there, Four, so cold. He was too weak to point or raise his head. So cold as a blanket fell over his shoulders. He could see the heads shaking, and knew it was too late to save her. Little Agnes's body was recovered the day after the accident. She was washed up naked on the white sands of Ardnag Point. Bruised and battered, tiny in death, her black hair tangled in seaweed, tossed by the tide, barely recognisable. She was wrapped quickly in a blanket of jackets to hide her disfigurement and carried back to the manse. Ewan sobbed as the little bundle was lifted from the cart. His mother lay sedated in the darkened bedroom, and his father stood like an alabaster statue, trying to compose his features as he viewed what remained of his child. He had barely spoken one word to his son since that dreadful evening when Ewan was brought home shivering by Dr. Murray. Now the parson must contain his fury and find words for an elegy of hope for his only daughter. He laid into his son only when they were alone. What have you to say for yourself? I forbade you to take those girls in the water. Her death and our sorrow are on your hands. John McKinnon's words were like ice on his skin. The other bairn is saved, I hear. Trust the sea to deliver back its own. I hold you solely to blame. How could he offer anything in reply? He sat in his room for days, unable to eat or sleep. What was the point of telling them the honest truth that he had come upon them purely by chance, or that Agnes had disobeyed his warnings when she answered Min's challenge to walk on water? No one walks on water but the Lord. Blasphemers will be punished, his father would have answered. How was the McPhee girl supposed to know such sophistry? It was not the child's fault. She was too young to know that no one challenged the sea, too innocent of the ways of water and tide, too ignorant to realise its treachery, for the ocean's ways were cruel, and its heart was ice cold. Someone must take the blame for the accident, so it might as well be him. It was his fault for teaching them how to swim in the first place, for taking away their natural fear of water. He had killed his sister. He sat watching the silver-grey waves crashing onto the shingle in the darkening light, the breaking water pounding the sands. Once he had found comfort in watching the power of wind on water, but there was nothing romantic in its bleakness, only the hypnotic thrash of the waves on the shingle. A great emptiness filled his heart, knowing he must watch the battered remains of his sister being placed deep in Ballinotter kirkyard. The agony of his mother trying to be Christian about this terrible tragedy. There was no sleeping as the nightmares of guilt haunted his dreams. He kept swimming out into that black endless sea without a shore, trying to catch Agnes's arm to save her from the rocks. How many nights had he woken in a sweat of if-onlys, seeing Agnes drowning over and over again? Did she gulp in salt? Her eyes bursting, limbs thrashing, alone and terrified. The sea was a fickle mistress in snatching one to its bosom with cruel fingers, yet casting the other unharmed ashore. He had prided himself on his knowledge of the cruel sea, but who could sound its unfathomable deep? There was no peace in the running waves. Memories like waves tumbling over each other, scratching his mind like grit between his toes. How could he live, knowing it was all his fault? For days after the drowning, Min woke screaming with terror, choking and sweating, but she could never recall the nightmare. All she could hear was the waves pounding in her ear, the water over her head and her struggle to reach the surface for breath. All she could see was Ewan's face looming over her, shouting her back to life. The rest was a blur. There was no comfort back in the croft. You bring shame to our clachan. To swim in a rough sea, to challenge the witches of Ardnag Point. Mother paddled the treadle of the spinning wheel with peat-stained boots, as if she didn't care. It is a thrashing you'll be getting when Uncle Niall returns, you wicked girl. Your wilful disobedience was the death of the minister's child. That was the moment she found out that Agnes was drowned, and it was all her fault. Not 1 ounce of sympathy was given to the shivering child. She ran to the rocks to hide from the silence and the stares, throwing boulders into the water with fury. The sea shimmered like polished silver in the moon's pale light. It looked calm and inviting, but she knew underneath ragged wicked spirits brewing another cauldron of boiling water especially for her this time. Everyone hated her, and for a second she wondered if she must jump into the sea and join Agnes forever in Tir na Nog. No, not yet, whispered a little voice inside her head. You have to stay on this dry land forever. If only they had played on the dunes and ignored Ewan's presence. If only she had not tried to be clever and show off to him. Min knew behind all the excuses there was always this wish to impress the boy, to show him she was as good a swimmer as he was now. Pride was her undoing. It was all her fault, and she must be punished. There were whisperings in the cottage doors as she passed by. What do you expect from a bastard McPhee? That's the cursed one, that bairn with the silver hair and mermaid's tail. Don't play with her, or you'll die, shouted the children, running away from her. I'm not going to school, Min whined, backing away from her morning walk down the coast track to Kilfetrish. My guts is churning. Ailey McPhee was deaf to her pleas, shoving her roughly on her way. You'll go and take your medicine. I'm no having one of mine shaming us any more than you have. On your haunches and walk." Min crept slowly to the play yard, pausing to wait at her usual spot where Agnes was dropped off the cart for school. What was the point in hovering for a cart that did not appear? In that instant, she knew Agnes would never play with her again, and Min was alone. The teacher, Mr. Macpherson, was stern-faced and said, "Minna is not to be blamed for the tragic accident. The ways of the Lord are strange to our blinded eyes, and we will not question his holy judgment in choosing one to be saved and the other lost. It is up to Minna to prove herself worthy of such a mercy." They sang "There's a Home for Little Children Above the Bright Blue Sky," which was Agnes's favourite hymn, and said lengthy prayers. The teacher said she was not to blame, but his cold eyes told Min a different story. They could not hide his doubting. The children gathered at the manse door, with wild flowers and wreaths, but none of them was let indoors to pay respects. Agnes was not for public viewing. Agnes was buried in the churchyard by the men of Ballinotter. Min wept by the shore, but no one comforted her. For months afterwards she was shunned in the playground and after school. There was no volunteer to take Agnes's place as her friend. Ewan disappeared from school to the mainland, and Mother decided to walk 3 miles further down the coast to join another kirk with a stricter congregation. Sometimes when the blanket of gloom was wrapped tight on her shoulders, she would spit at Min. "I cannae bear to look upon the poor minister's sad face, knowing it's all my bairn's doing. Devil's child that you are, conceived in lust and born in fear. From now on you will wear black weeds to mind you of your sin and disobedience, to bring you to salvation. Why did the sea no take you to its bosom instead of that angel child?" Min had wished that on many a tide, but said nothing. The years would roll on until it was time to put books away and be at the mercy of a poor girl's fate. Her punishment was to stay on the island forever. Chapter 2. The Crannog, 1933. "Don't you step out of that scullery, lassie, until you've shed every one of those rags, my girl. Off with they sacks and skirts, down to your vest. What's the world coming to when I have to train up a wee bastard of Ely McPhee?" The cook sighed, her bosoms heaving at the sight of the ragamuffin standing in a pool of dirty woolens, her eyes like blue enamel saucers. "Still, you cannae help your birthing, but shove that mop of straw hair in this cap. Who knows what'll jump out of yon wild lugs and bite me?" Min shivered in her knitted underwear. Her bare feet were not used to the stone-flagged floors. There was a dark chill in the storeroom, with its grey-painted shelves high to the ceiling, stacked with brown crock-pots and stone jars. To her left was a walk-in pantry where rows of dead creatures swung in the cool breeze from the wire mesh window. On the sink board, a fish with glazed eyes was staring at her, with its guts ripped open. This was a place of death and mutilation, and she was expected to make her home here. "Take this overall and the penny. Wrap it round and see to that bucket of vegetables. We'll give you a good scrub later. Go on, sharp to your duties, lassie. I want all they carrots and tatties scrubbed and peeled, no black bits left. And take yon footstool to reach to the sink. You've still a few years growing in you by the size of you." Min stood awestruck by the rattle of orders. She bobbed and bent her head. "Well, say, 'Yes, Mistress Lamont,' to me. Rules is rules here. This is no the schoolyard now, McPhee. You're here to watch and learn. Follow me like a shadow, silent and respectful, for you never know the time or the hour when that bell will clang and I'll be needed upstairs." Susan Lamont was examining the specimen before her like a lump of butcher meat, hardly the size of a twopence halfpenny, a sharp-jawed little madam in the making, if ever there was one. The girl's bottom lip was trembling. "None of yon sulky mouth on you. Stick that bonnet on straight and find a Kirby grip in the jar to tidy away your wisps. We keep a tight ship in my kitchen, even though it's not the Queen Mary it once was. We must do our best for Lady Rose, so not a peep out of you until that bucket is emptied." Min stood on the stool to reach into the sink, tears plopping onto the peelings. This was not what she'd hoped for when leaving Cofetrish School, to be sent for a skivvy to the big house, stranded on the island. At the end of her first long shift, she ran home across the damp grass to the cottage on the shore. "Well," said her mother as she sat knitting, making the most of the evening sunshine, "I'm not going back there again. I hate it. It's full of dead things. I want to go back to my schooling." Min sat on the grass, feeding the wool from the basket to her mother like a machine. "Wheesht, wheesht, my gooey," Mother replied as she drew an arc of spun wool like threads of gossamer into the air. "It's an honour for the likes of us to be serving at the big house." "No, it's no. Even I know fine that the best servants go to Glasgow to seek their fortune. Why does it take so many people to look after one old woman? The Lady Rose Struther hardly leaves her bedroom. I hate it, and I'm not going back the morrow." Min stared out to flat sea glinting like green glass. It wasn't fair to have to leave the school. At the summer prize giving at Cofetrish School, Lady Rose had arrived in a pony and trap, her silver hair tucked under a flowery straw hat. She was escorted by the minister to the platform in the yard before the assembled school, the wind whipping up her long gauzy skirt to reveal layers of silken petticoats and white calfskin boots. She was so thin, she curved against the force of the breeze in a C shape, her shoulders hunched and rounded. Min joined the queue for her leaving certificate and a small prize for knitting and mending. The minister's son had taken all the best prizes alongside Joanna McCallum, the factor's daughter. She had won the Struther scholarship to a Glasgow college. Min hung back at the unfamiliar sound of her Sunday name, Mary Minna, until she felt the fist of the Dominie in her shoulder blades propelling her forward to bow to Lady Rose. "You should be proud to be fished out of the pond, honoured that you were specially asked for at the Cranach. Was it not you who never once missed a day's schooling? Who won the prize for the neatest spinning and mending?" Mother nodded with satisfaction, thinking her task well done. There was little else to offer a child with such an unfortunate history. "Why did my father drown at sea before your wedding?" Min screamed like a seagull. If only they could read into her soul how she longed to go to the mainland and study for a teacher, or smooth the sick brows of the fevered ones like a Florence Nightingale, or even row madly into the storm like her heroine, Grace Darling. Now she must rise at dawn and walk down the white, sandy tracks to the grey stone house that glowered out on the early morning mist, a stern old granite keep softened by a fancy front full of windows to catch the sun. It was turreted like a fairy castle, but she must take the back gate of the Cranach, keeping out of sight of the front windows and garden path, just in case Lady Rose might catch a glimpse of a rough servant at her chores spoiling her view. "No more of such devil's talk. It is the will of the Lord that he places you where he wills you to do his duty." Her mother lifted rough hands together in prayerful thanksgiving. "Let us thank him for his mercy that he places you safe amongst us as a dutiful servant to your betters. You will learn fine manners, and they'll give you your daily bread, and it's one less mouth for me to feed from our small pot. Mind, you'll speak English to your betters, and we can hold our heads in the clachan here. So be a good girl attentive to your mistress. Don't lose your chance of betterment. It was one of those days when Mother was speaking like a Bible, so Min shrugged her shoulders and sighed. There was no changing her fate. It was only what she deserved. But she would not give in without a fight. It's no betterment. This back-breaking, rough work with chapped hands, fingers pickled like vegetables and aching legs from stretching on tippy-toe, Min argued. If only she was taller, prettier, or cleverer. It was not fair that her friends could go to the mainland for an education. Then Min paused in full flow, thinking of her only true friend lying in the graveyard, and shuddered. This must be her punishment, so she must make the best of it. For months, Min saw only the scullery and the kitchen range, the pantry and the outhouse, the laundry and the backyard where she fed the scratting hens and put Lady Rose's smalls to blow dry in the gale. There was the endless steeping and boiling, starching, ironing, all to be done to Mistress Lamont's strict instructions. The skeleton staff had many extra jobs. The annual stock-taking, spring cleaning and preparations for any summer visitors, who thankfully brought their own staff to see to them. When there were strangers in the house, there was such rivalry and much tut-tutting from the English maids, who found life on Fetri no picnic, gurning about the weather, the wind, the lack of gas and electricity, telephones and wirelesses, whatever they were. Sometimes they would leave behind magazines with pictures of their ladies in the season, at the court balls and the races. Min would drool over the beautiful clothes and ball gowns with jewels and sumptuous fur wraps. There were pictures of the little royal princesses with their nanny. How she longed to go to London to see it all for herself. Everyone gossiped about the good old days before the Great War, when servants were 2 a penny and the house rang with laughter. There had been shooting parties when Lord Struthers' coterie of cronies landed for the season in a motor car that was hoisted off the steam packet on a crane and driven up the Crannog in a sandstorm of white dust. Then the war took the Fetri men away to sea, to watery graves far from their homes. The few that came back to tell their tales wanted more for their sons than service. The widows and mothers struggled to keep the croft fires burning. Young Lord Struther was killed early in the war. His wife caught the Spanish flu in London, and only his sister, Lady Rose, returned from her ambulance driving, with a bunch of wild, harum-scarum women who wore no corsets and cropped their hair like men. Some had been in prison and were exhausted, sickly, and for a while, the place echoed with their girly chatter. There were rumours flying around the island of strange goings-on at midnight when they gathered in a circle, trying to speak to their long dead. Mistress Lamont whispered with a sniff that they were tempting the very devil himself. Later the Crannog fell silent for months on end, boarded up, covered with dust sheets until Lady Rose returned in 1930 to live permanently in seclusion. It was rumoured that she had been disgraced at court, but no one knew the details, and there was no one left to care. She lived among the Hebes and the red-hot pokers in the high-walled garden that stood firm against the worst of the westerly winds, writing her memoirs and reliving lost joys. Min grew accustomed to the ways of the household, so different from life on the seashore. She got used to having a bath and brushing her hair until it shone, tying it back in a bun, mending her uniform, pressing it firmly into shape. She no longer needed the footstool as her legs lengthened and her shape filled out with all the leftover plates of food she wolfed down. Sometimes Mistress Lamont trusted her to poach the salmon, stir the sauces and prepare the afternoon teas neatly on the butler's tray, with a starched cloth and gleaming silver teapots while she dozed in her armchair by the range. Then came the fateful day when Effie Brown was sick, and there was no maid to see to Lady Rose. Min was ordered into the cotton print day dress with a broderie anglaise apron and sent upstairs to see her mistress. She slid up the staircase silently with her wooden tray to prepare the fires in the bedroom, counting the portraits on the wall slowly. Dour faces peering out of wigs with hoity expressions, knowing full well that she was novice. She was to see to the rooms, while no one was in the house, but a shrill voice called from the bedroom. "Brown, is that you?" Min froze. Should she disappear and ignore the summons, or reveal herself? Curiosity got the better of her fear, and she tapped on the door. "Brown is sick, Lady Rose. I'm McPhee," Min bobbed. This was her first task upstairs. The voice shouted from behind the bed curtains. "Fill a bath for me." Min knew about hip baths and bringing up jugs of hot water to the outer door, but had never had the honour of seeing to the whole palaver before. "Straight away?" she queried. "Of course, Brown, in front of the fire." Min scuttled down to the kitchen to check with the cook. Mistress Lamont was too busy to fuss over her. "Just make sure the bath is on the mat, or you'll shoot her over the polish like a curling stone." Up and down Min rushed, trying not to slop the water over the floor. The bath was dragged onto the mat and the fire stoked up to provide some warmth. The screen placed discreetly, while Lady Rose flopped on her high bed in a silk peignoir reading a book. How Min wanted to soak in a warm tub herself after all her exertions. There wasn't even a hefty man about the house to help with the carrying. Lady Rose did not lift her eyes as she wafted her away. "That'll be all. Stay upstairs in case I need you." Min hung at the top of the stairs, watching how the rain spatters made patterns on the vaulted dome window above her head. Each pane was edged with blue and gold stripes of stained glass. She could hear the sound of splashing and a thin, reedy voice attempting some tune. There were no warm towels airing on the fender. She dashed into the linen press and brought out a set of face, hand and bath towels, knocking gently once more. "I'm just going to warm your towels, my lady." "Good girl. While you're here, see to the commode in the dressing room." Min saw to her task and opened the dressing room door, trying not to retch as the stench of a full pan hit her nostrils. There was a slop bucket with a lid, tucked discreetly away, and scattered around the floor were pieces of dirty toilet paper left for the maid to pick up. Could a lady not dispose of her own dirt? Picking up each sheet, she held her breath with disgust. Lady Rose was not an invalid, but a lazy lay-abed who seemed incapable of doing anything for herself. How could she expect someone else to... But I'm not someone else, I'm just invisible. A nobody, a dog's body servant at the beck and call of anyone who demands my services. It's no fair. Suddenly her cheeks were on fire with indignation and humiliation. "I won't do this," she screamed inwardly. "I can't. Is this going to be my life forever? Trapped on Fetri? There's got to be a better way than this drudgery. But what?" Min stuffed the dirty papers into the pail and closed the lid sharp. She flung the scattered clothes back onto their hangers and wiped around the commode. "Whatever I do, I need a good reference. And I need better English, better manners. So use what's here to better your chances," she thought. She flung up the window sash to let the sweeter air scour the smells, and gazed out at the sea view. "Shut that blasted window! Do you want me to catch my death, Brown?" She still hadn't noticed that there was a new maid. "Sorry, ma'am," she said, trying not to smile. "Bring me a towel and you can rub me down," came the order. "Then lay out my clothes in the right order." Min lifted the towel as the old lady rose out of the water, standing like a lump of wet plaster, her skin hanging from her bones like rolls of dough. Min had never seen such an ugly nakedness before, such old skin like cooked apples. "I've not done this before," she confessed. "So I noticed. Just pat my back for me and fetch the powder. You can do my feet between my toes. And not so rough. You've a lot to learn." "Yes, Lady Rose," she stammered, hardly daring to raise her eyes. Now she must collect the clothes from the closet drawers. Underwear, chemise, corselet, silk stockings, drawers, and petticoat. There were so many dresses in the wardrobe to choose from. Day dresses, tea dresses, house coats and wraps, skirts and tweeds, woolens with a softness of lamb's wool. Everything was so beautifully lined and finished, so expensively tailored, laid down under the canopy of the four-poster bed, with its eider-down pillows and satin counterpane. Min thought of her own mother as one Sunday dress, tough, heavy wool woven coarsely into scratchy tweed, the colour of the dark earth, her sackcloth apron, black skirts, peat-stained boots and coarse hand-knitted underwear with stockings to the knee. This was a world away from their humble living by the seashore in stone houses, smelling of stinky, rotting fish bones and cow-dung fires, with dampness creeping into every nook and cranny of their thick walls. They stood like grey tombstones on the edge of the macher facing east, backs to the wind. "That'll do. Leave me now. I can see to the rest," the lady dismissed. Now the bath must be emptied and the linen changed, the soiled clothes removed, the bed made, the fires stoked again, up and down all morning while Lady Rose breakfasted in the morning room. All this effort just to give one person a bath. Tomorrow it would have to be repeated if Effie Brown did not return to work. If this was life above stairs, sniffed Min, you could keep it. When Effie Brown left to get married, Min was promoted from tweenie to parlour maid. Lady Rose was ill, and the nurse engaged to see to her nursing left after only a few months of the island winter. She found herself used as nurse companion and the lady's maid to her frail employer. Lady Rose grew eccentric and dabbled in clairvoyance and other such devilments. Much to the minister's dismay, it was whispered. On her good days, the invalid would dress and be helped to the fireside, where she sat gazing into the flames. She said she could read fortunes in the flames. Min dared to ask her once for her own fortune, praying it would not be to marry some fisherman, raise 6 bairns, and look like her mother before she was 30. Lady Rose pointed with a bony finger towards the fireplace. "I see you are a water sprite. Ruled by the tides, happiest close to the shore, but never far from the sea." This made no sense to the maid, and she turned to draw the curtains. She had turned her back on the sea since Agnes drowned. Sometimes Lady Rose would take herself slowly to the piano and finger out some tune. "Do you know this one, McPhee? Sing it to me." There were no wirelesses on Fetri, just the fiddle music of the Cayley bands, so Min knew nothing of the mainland music. She shook her head sadly. Sometimes the old lady would smile and go to the gramophone and place the black circle on the turntable, her eyes far away dancing to the peanut vendor. Min had to wind it up tight and gently lift the needle onto the surface. "Don't scratch it, girl." From out of that box came the most wonderful sounds from faraway places. Lady Rose would point them out on the round label and give her the names of the composers: Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, waltzes from Vienna and tangos from South America, ballet music from Russia and military two-steps, Highland reels and jigs. This is what you do. Lady Rose would open her arms and hold her stick, tottering and swaying with an imaginary partner. It was rumoured down the back stairs that Miss Struther once was engaged to some handsome viscount who died of cholera in India. Min pretended she was in the arms of Rudolph Valentino, whose picture appeared in the glossy magazines strewn about the guest bedrooms. Once his image appeared on the sheet on the wall of the church hall in the moving picture show. His romantic antics had shocked the worthies of the kirk, and the film had been quickly whisked away, replaced by a film on African elephants. Try as she might to recapture his picture, the only gentleman's face that danced before her was that of the dark-eyed son of the manse, Ewan Dhu, who had grown tall and broad since he went away to college, who never passed her by without a nod. They never spoke of Agnes McKinnon's drowning. The two survivors exchanged only glances over the years. The minister was always curt in his greeting when he called at the house, and she sensed she was still blamed for her friend's death. It was hard, for Min could rake up no memory of the incident, and wondered why it was she who was saved for a purpose, not Agnes. It was like an invisible yoke bending her back. Sometimes she took wild flowers to Agnes's grave and sat on the grassy mound to tell her news of all the children in their class. Min sensed she was just talking into thin air. Agnes was lost as a little girl and knew nothing of the grown-up world Min must inhabit, but it was the least she could do to keep her informed. Everyone said there was a war coming soon, and that worried her. Once she met Ewan McKinnon standing by the headstone. He looked as if he was about to speak to her, hovering for a second and then moving on. Cook said that he was sweet on Joanna McCallum, who was training to be a teacher in Glasgow. He still spent most of his holidays in a canoe, paddling across Loch Beg at great speed, like Hiawatha in the poem, or helping the fishermen at the harbour. Ewan was growing tall and straight and handsome in his cadet uniform, far too grand now to mix in Min's humdrum world. On bad days, Lady Rose only wanted to hear sad ballads and Gallic laments. Tears would roll down her crinkled face, and she sniffed into a lace handkerchief when Min sang for her the lament, Gergo, Criach, about a widow weeping for her beheaded husband, whilst singing to her baby. "You've a fine voice, girl, and a good ear. A good song gives wings to the spirit. I shall have to teach you to accompany me." To cheer her up, Min would mimic the old walking songs that spinners and weavers would sing when walking the cloth to shrink it. Often the words were lewd and suggestive, but Lady Rose had no Gaelic and just tapped along with the rhythm. "Do that again!" She clapped her hands like a simple child. When Lady Rose was smiling, it was like sunshine through dark clouds, for she taught her servant to play cards and finger tunes. Min's own English was improving too, for she was blessed with a parrot's ear for mimicking accent and vowel sounds. She was copying the educated voice of a high-born lady. Her vowels were round and distinct. She had decided long ago if she was going to speak English in public, then it must be the best sort without the usual Highland lilt to it. In the record collection on the bookshelf was one with actors and actresses speaking plays and poems in perfect English, and she would sneak down when Lady Rose was asleep to listen and rehearse their sounds over and over again. She swallowed their sounds, projecting the words back in a perfect rendition of the original. Some days Lady Rose grew restless and wanted all her porcelain figurines out of the glazed cabinets to be washed and dusted. Each one was lovingly inspected, and the hallmarks underneath explained in detail. Soon Min could recognise the Sèvres from the Rockingham, the Royal Worcester and the Chelsea from Meissen by their distinguishing marks and the colour of their glazes. She absorbed the information as if she was back in the schoolroom, squirreling it away into a drawer inside her head. To be a lady, she must know all these things: how to select the right cutlery, how to play the piano and dance gracefully, how to wear jewellery and recognise good perils or serve tea from a silver pot without spilling it everywhere. Lady Rose was an excellent instructor. Then came those grim days when her mistress lost grip on reality, screaming and lashing out at Min and the household as if she did not know them. The doctor was summoned, and she was put to bed out of harm's way until she slept off her thrashings in a drugged sleep. "What's the matter with the mistress?" Min asked her mother as they sat by the smoking dung fire, carding sheep rovings into rolls of raw wool for their spinning. "They say all the Struthers family go that way in the end. Too much high living and inbreeding on the brain. But I am saying it's an ancient curse on that place when the old laird sent his poor lover across the open sea to her death. No Struthers have prospered here." "Will she die?" Min asked, fearful of her own prospects. "Sure as death comes to us all, so mind your ways. No prancing to the devil's tunes. I'm after hearing what you get up to in the big house. If I catch you warbling on the Sabbath again, you're not too old for a skelping. Haven't we corncrakes enough to rattle us awake without you screeching to high heaven?" answered Ailey, her eyes sharp as flints. "I can play a tune on the piano now and make chords," Min boasted. "How many times must I tell you? Music is the curse of the McPhees. I will not have it in the house, do you hear? It is bad enough you pretending to be some milk-white loaf when the whole island knows you're nothing but an oatmeal bannock. It'll all end in tears." The harsh years had wizened her mother's features, and she looked more like a grandmother in widow weeds than a woman not much above 40. "I will never look like you," Min thought. "I'm going to be a lady one day." "What's so wrong when playing the piano? There's one in the church hall," Min argued. Why was music so wrong, she puzzled. "It's no for the likes of you to be dabbling your fingers on gentry's finery, aping your betters. No good can come of it." "Lady Rose says I have a good voice, so she does." "There's more to music than just a tune. It is the devil's instrument of lust," said Mother, looking into the fire, rubbing her hands. "I don't care. I can sing in English if I want to." Min was brushing so hard on the carding boards, trying not to argue. "Haven't the English caused us enough grief? If you must open your mouth, use your native tongue." "Lady Rose says it's a peasant's voice." "No more peasant noise, McPhee. Time to speak properly." Min mimicked her lady so accurately that even Mother looked up with a half-smile. "Remember who you are, Mary Minna McPhee. I'm a Teuchter, daughter of the tide, hewn from Fettrie granite, Lady Rose says. Aye, Highland daughter of Fettrie. Geltocht, never forget the soil that nourished you. Think of our forefathers, forced to wander over the earth with no land to call their own because of the English lords. It's said to me only yesterday that this Mr. Hitler is doing just such to other poor cotterfolk o'er the water. It won't be long before we'll be getting a taste of his wickedness. I hope the good Lord calls me home before that day." "Is there really going to be another war?" said Min eagerly, having missed all the excitement of the Great War. "We must pray that he will spare us from that hour. Fettrie men are all for the sea, and who knows how many of them will find some watery grave in the king's service," Mother warned. "I shall be a soldier then and join up. I want to see the world one day, Mother." "I don't know where you get such notions." "Come what may, you'll be staying here to see to your elders, to grow food for our sustenance. Who will tend to our patch with me so crippled in the joints? One wanderer in the family will be sufficient. Uncle Niall will do his duty if called upon," Mother said. "Then I'll be a nurse," Min argued. "How will I be managing without your wage? No more words in the matter. Such a trial you are to me, sent on this earth to punish my wickedness. I thought here on Fettrie you were safe from temptation, but Once already you've shamed us. What temptation is this then? Min was curious. You'll know about it when it comes along, Muggley. You must be strong for your fear of face. Never turn your back on a man, that's all I'll be saying. Mind and don't let me hear you blaspheming the Sabbath again. No, Mother. Min bowed her head to hide her smile. Over the next few months, she often dreamt at her polishing, watching sunlight beaming down on the piano like a searchlight. Nothing of this servile time would be wasted. Its drudgery only spurred her forward towards a better life and learning the piano before it was too late. One day, she would be a lady too. Lady Rose grew strange and wouldn't eat. They took her away on the ferry to an institution and the house lay empty. There were only 2 of the staff left to clean up. The world was already changing, for the threat of war brought builders to the island. Suddenly, concrete hangars and control towers sprang up like trees, and water pipes snaked across the fields, roads widened, and electricity brought its magic to the aerodrome. Then came the time to pack the Struthers' porcelain in tea chests. All the little friends put to bed. Min loved the dancers and shepherdesses. She had given them all names, English names. Pamela, Clarissa, Arabella, looking so delicate in their finery. Not one of them was broken, for her fingers were fine-tuned to caress them with care. One day, she vowed, as she was packing them all in tissues into special boxes, I'll be having some of my very own. Then they took down all the portraits from the wall. The Royal Air Force was commandeering the Cranach as an officer's billet for the duration, and Min's services were no longer needed. The piano stayed where it was. Sometimes she used to sneak back, open the shutters and climb through the window to practice in her spare time, to finger the keyboard and test out the chords and harmonies. The right blends came easily to her ears, from some unknown source within. And with the music came a certainty that her life must change. She was not going to be chained by ignorance. Sometimes she walked around the little loch along a boggy path, watching the moorhens scuttling among the reeds, listening to the distant rattle of a corncrake. Working at the Cranach had opened the doors into other worlds where music and china and paintings mattered. She felt bereft of the porcelain, her dolls, her imaginary friends. They spoke of a world far away, full of other beautiful things. When she grasped them in her hands, feeling their cool textures, savouring their pastel colours, gold trimmings and their craftsmanship. She stood by the water edge, vowing that one day there would be a cabinet full of china dolls, just for herself. The thought of such ambition was scary. It would set her apart, but she didn't care. Sometimes she felt like a lonely island set in a sea of busy people. No one cared for her wishes. She must make her own dreams come true. Chapter 3. Kilfetrish Harbour, 1939. It was a summer of blue skies and sunshine. The island shimmered in the sun, as if to compensate for the gathering gloom of events unfolding in Europe. Everyone was on the move, making preparations, talking of air raid precautions and camouflage. But the kittiwakes still dived into a turquoise sea, and seals sunned themselves on the rocks as the local defence volunteers paraded up and down Kilfetrish Bay with pitchforks and scythes for their weaponry. Nothing was going to stop the annual summer regatta when the islanders gathered in the harbour to watch the sailing boats racing, the dinghies and swimmers competing for the trophies, and all the sideshows lined up on the grassy slopes with beach games and races for the children. It was time for the crofters and fishermen, tradesmen and kelpers to strip off their workday clothes, to roll lobster-faced and sweating for the honour of their township in time-honoured fashion. Time to square old rivalries. Ballinottar versus Kilfetrish. Ardnag against the Clachan at Loch Beg. The day dawned glorious to behold, and the Ladies' Guild prepared the trestle tables with white linen cloths spun from the white bog cotton grass. The home baking was covered with voile shower cloths to keep the flies and thieving fingers of the torags from the tray bakes, cakes, biscuits, and lemonade in stone jars. Even the sick and elderly wanted an airing on such a beautiful day, sitting in makeshift carts with moist eyes, recalling their own youth and fitness. Everyone wanted the day to go well, for who knew when there would be another such regatta? Min loved Fetri Regatta. There was always this feeling that the whole island was gathering together, with crowds as far as the eye could see. She thought that this must be what it was like all the time on the mainland. Hundreds of folk just milling around, thronging the streets of Oban in just such a bustle. How Min yearned to board the SS Hebrides and sail away, but there was never any occasion to justify the expense. Yet this was a gap in her education that never would be filled until she saw the mainland for herself. She wanted to see how people walked and talked and dressed there, and envied the lucky crofters' wives who went to visit relatives in Glasgow and Inverness, who came back full of boasting and fancy gadgets for their homes. Here she was stuck with just her mother and herself, as usual, and Uncle Niall was now back in the Merchant Navy, so mother would not hear of her venturing abroad. Abroad's not all it's cracked up to be, believe me. I should know. Ailey was briefly in service in Glasgow, but returned homesick and terrified of city ways. She would never talk of the time, and when she did, the events were recalled in hushed tones as a time of abomination in her life. It was making Min all the more determined to leave the island. "When I'm 21, I'll save up and go and see for myself," she argued. "No one will stop me then." Mother would purse her lips and knit furiously. "I'll no be stopping you then. You'll soon learn that the city streets are not paved with gold. You'll no have far to find your sorrows there, my gooey." Now that the Crannog was being cleared out, waiting for military billeting orders, Min foraged for jobs to fill the empty purse. The money that Uncle Niall sent home came in fits and starts, and sometimes it seemed as if there was only the milk cow and egg money to keep them from starvation. Mother knitted rough wool boot stockings from sheep rovings, and her share of the fleece, knitting up thick jerseys for the builders. She helped out in the vegetable fields, or gathering the kelp from the seashore to load onto carts for spreading over the crofters' fields. Sometimes she helped in the village stores, minding the schoolmaster's young children, or running messages on a borrowed bicycle. She looked with disgust at her coarsened skin and rough hands, her weather-beaten face, how the sun had streaked and bleached her fair hair and mottled her arms with freckles. It was hard to keep up old standards and look respectable. How she yearned for her days in service, when food was plentiful and bathing regularly had made her feel like a lady. Her life had taken a step backwards to the shore again. Today she was going to forget all her woes and enjoy the atmosphere of the regatta. She watched all the coloured sails bobbing on the water, the bunting fluttered overhead round the harbour, the flags waving in the soft breeze, all the women in their printed frocks and hats like rows of bright flowers. Even the fierce westerlies had calmed for the day. Later, there would be a bonfire on the beach and a ceilidh with singing and dancing, and she was not going to miss that for anything. Yet, she felt so dowdy in her faded Sunday frock. She loosened her braids, letting her white hair fall down her back, catching it up with the velvet blue Alice band found stuck behind the dressing table when she was clearing Lady Rose's belongings from her room. Everyone was gathering in groups. Families of fishermen lugging creels stuffed with food, the crofters with land standing in their tweed jackets, their wives in linen two-piece suits bought from the catalogue stores on the mainland. The fishermen stood in shirt sleeves and cloth caps with bright neckerchiefs. The families of the minister, the doctor, the schoolteacher and the factor had the best view, sitting in deck chairs watching the sailing boats with binoculars and sunshades. The ladies were dressed in silk dresses with white hats and the men in linen jackets and Panama hats. Here and there were the uniforms of officers and ratings from the Navy and Merchant Fleet. It was then that Min spotted the tall figure of Ewan Dhu standing next to his father, pointing out the competitors. The sight of him made her heart thud with a strange apprehension. "We're short!" yelled the skipper of the Ballinotter boat, pointing to the young naval officer. "Come on, Ewan! You can take an oar!" There was a cheer as he tore off his jacket and shirt, rolled up his trousers to his mother's consternation, and raced down to join the boat. But Min was pleased to see that the college boy was still a fettery man at heart. He leapt aboard and grabbed an oar. The team rowed off unevenly, all the oars crashing and splattering, but after some practice and manoeuvres, the crew began to row in unison, striking out with a rhythm to the starting line, where all the township boats were lining up. The Colfetrish boat was always the favourite to win, and Min, by rights, should have been shouting for them. But as the gun went off and the race began, her eyes could not leave the Ballinotter crew and the muscular shape of the minister's son, who strained on the oar. They began slowly, far behind the Colfetrish men. Then, as they gathered their timing together, they began to edge towards the leading boat as it thrashed its way towards the marker buoy, just out of the harbour, where the boats must turn and head back for the finishing line. The yelling was deafening as the Ballinotter boat began to ease its way forward, making the Colfetrish crew strain on their oars, pulling to a faster beat. Ewan's boat struck out in response even more strongly until they were neck and neck, red-faced with the agony of the effort to take the lead. On either side of the harbour, the crowds roared encouragement. "Come on, Ewan, you can win!" Min was jumping up and down. Her mother tugged at her skirt. "Wheesh, it is shame you're bringing on us making an exhibition of yoursel. It's not for you to be calling out for him. Miss McCallum is over there, quite capable of calling him in herself." Min stopped, suddenly aware that Joanna McCallum, in her striped pinafore dress and straw boater, was waving her handkerchief and shouting to Ewan's boat. "You can do it! Come on, Ballinotter! It's only a wee race, mother. I can shout for whosoever I like. Come on, Ewan," she continued. It was going to be a close call, neck and neck to the finishing line. But somehow the Ballinotter crew managed to summon enough effort to take the line by a whisker. The township rose as one to cheer their heroes up the quay. The crew sat back exhausted, exhilarated, clapping each other's backs heartily, while the Colfetrish men sat slumped with bent heads, surprised by this unexpected defeat. What a change in Ewan McKinnon. He was so dark, so confident, grown into a man in that world across the water. As he strolled up the quayside, being slapped on the back and congratulated, he looked so changed. Why had she never noticed just how handsome he was, with his black hair flopping over his bronzed face? Her first instinct was to run down and congratulate him herself, fling her arms around him, but she held back and turned away shyly. They were no longer children. It would not be proper. Why should he recognise her in this crowd with all the other girls screaming and fussing over him? She was just another rough cotter girl in a shabby frock with nothing but their childhood friendship to recommend her. She would be only another tragic reminder of his lost sister Agnes. Why should he acknowledge her presence with Joanna already standing by his side? Something was sparking inside her like a tinderbox set alight. Had she caught a look or a smile of instant recognition? She had the sudden, overpowering feeling that she and Ewan were joined forever by the drowning of his sister, and of him saving her own life, bound together like boys tied with a rope. In that spark burst such a flame of love for him. In that flash of insight, she knew that Ewan must be hers alone. He must be mine. He's always been mine. He saved my life. We were such friends before. Why should Agnes's grave always stand between them? They were bound by suffering, but she could still feel that terrible, despairing doubt. Who are you, Min McPhee, to stake a claim on him? You're just a field worker, a serving girl, a nobody. Suddenly she could feel again the chill-like clouds overshadowing the harbour, darkening the skies as she wrestled with that strange, sick feeling of yearning and jealousy, punching her hand with a gnarled fist. He's mine, but how can I make him notice me? The dancing was held in the open air by the light of many flickering bonfires on the beach. The sand was still warm as bare feet stomped to the fiddle, and the circling couples made patterns on the shore. The old piano from the Tulloch bar was dragged to the edge of the grass, and a drummer made up a makeshift trio. Older couples sat on the benches and grass. Children darted like horseflies in and out of the swirling dancers. It was coming to the end of a summer's day when the sun had burnt Ewan's forehead and shoulders, and his limbs were aching from the races, while Clegg's feasted on sweaty arms and swollen ankles. A day to linger long in the fetry memory. This might be the last day of summer, 1939. The last dance before the world might come to an end, he thought. Hearts were heavy now as he looked around old school friends assembled who soon would be posted off like him to God knows where. How many of us will be returning for the next regatta, he wondered. There was a lull in the dancing, and Ewan's group drifted towards the harbour benches, while the musicians had retired to the bar. Someone was fingering the keyboard, picking out a tune, a few quiet chords, and then a traditional waltz. One or two couples got up to spin around the sand, smiling. Ewan was punch drunk with sun and the pleasure of being home. It was the end of a perfect day. What'll I do when you're far away? Catching the mood of the moment, the singer in the distance was crooning softly. Joanna stopped to listen to the song and crooned along with the music, but a little out of tune. There was a ripple of applause, which gave the pianist the encouragement to keep on playing. "Who's singing?" he asked, curious. Joanna shrugged her shoulders. The clapping grew stronger, and the impromptu entertainer stood for her finale, singing in Gaelic, a lament for a lost lover. It was a sad, haunting tune, calculated to bring a tear to any Highlander's eye. There was something about the singing of the ballads that got him on his feet. "Come and see the blonde piece, singing like a mermaid," yelled Lachiman, one of the boat crew. "You'll never guess who it is down there," he laughed. "I'm away to get a dance for her." There was a stunned silence as she bowed and slid from the piano, while the pianist patted her on the shoulder. "Well done, Minnie McPhee. You're a wee siren. What a voice, fit to make the angels in heaven weep. Why aren't you singing in the musical festival at the Mod?" Ewan stood transfixed by the sight of her. Was it really Min? How she had grown up, slender, taller, with white hair rippling down her back. For an instant, he thought about his sister and how she would have looked now. But his eyes feasted on the girl in the blue dress. The clapping was still ringing in his ears, but it faded away when she looked up at him, leaning on the door of the Tulloch bar, smoking his pipe and talking with his group. He turned in her direction and stared at her, the brass buttons of his dark naval uniform flickering in the bonfire light. He was glad he had dressed for the dance in his uniform. He found himself pulled slowly towards her, smiling. I thought it must be Dame Nellie Melba singing to her seals again. You took me back all those years ago. You know Joanna, and Duncan and Ishbel? He introduced his friends. They all nodded politely, looking at her with little interest. Joanna was brushing the folds of her dancing frock, which rustled when she turned. Then she held onto his arm. He found himself edging away. Jo was pleasant enough, a good friend, a pen pal. It was not as if they were sweethearts or anything mushy, but she was edging him away. Come on, everyone, the dancing's going to start again. You've a lovely voice, Minna. You ought to get it trained. Ewan paused for a second, hesitating as if to draw Min along with the crowd into their circle of dancers. But the others strode ahead and called him once more. He ought to be polite, but he wanted to talk to his old friend, to dance with her and to touch her, and it shocked him. It was as if he was seeing her for the first time. When did she become such a beauty? The pull of her was like the tide. Min's heart sank. Her moment of glory was over. It was a hopeless cause to set her sights on a naval officer who was practically engaged. She would return home, not wishing to be a wallflower at the dancing. Turning to go, her arm was grabbed by Lachie Munn, her neighbour's boy. We're short for the 8-some reel, McPhee. Gie us your hand. Reluctantly, she was pushed into the formation of dancing groups and turned to face her partner with a heavy heart. Lachie Munn was about her stretch. She sighed, a fisherman from the same clachan of cottages on the shore. He was smiling at her hopefully, but she ignored his grinning. There were better fish to fry than a laddie she could only recall at school with scabby knees and lugs like jug handles. Swung this way and that as the band struck up the music, Min soon found herself caught up by the beat and the swirling couples. It was a progressive reel, and the moment moved ever closer when she would be swung in the arms of Ewan Dhu. She could hardly breathe, waiting as his circle drew closer and closer. Then they were laughing and swinging round together, and the weary world spun away like a top. She was dizzy with skipping and prancing, clasping Ewan's firm hands as he spun her round so fast that she felt herself lifted off the floor into his arms. She gazed shamelessly into those dark eyes, drawing in the power of his undivided attention. He was smiling, responding to her signals and the rhythm of the dance. And suddenly there was no one on the beach but the two of them. Was there promise and admiration in his eyes? Or was she dreaming? Min wanted the dancing to go on forever, but in an hour the Sabbath would dawn and everyone would away to their beds. Just for this moment, there was magic in the air. Her prayer had been answered by the warmth of Ewan's firm arm around her waist and the look in his eye. Thank you. She winged a prayer heavenwards. He's mine for the moment. It's up to me now to make all other competition fade away. In those furtive glances, something strange and wonderful was happening between them. Buoyed up by such emotions that Min could hardly express, she felt she was swimming in a sea without a shore, floating endlessly across the world. How could one day in her life begin so quietly and end with such a roar? She did not sleep a wink, listening to the crash of water on shingle. She felt like a restless tide, rising and falling, living those few precious moments of the dancing over and over again in her mind's eye. She felt like the sea just before a storm, when it heaves and sighs, tossing and turning until it was dawn, and another quiet Sabbath must be endured. There was the long walk to church, the droning sermon, the cracking and gossip at the kirk door, the walk home, and then it must be endured all over again. Why could she not go back to the old kirk and see if Ewan was sitting in his family pew? This morning she wanted to sing and dance and shout her excitement to the world. But a Fetry Sunday was a day for walking sedately, reading spiritual books and praying. Her heart was racing with plans. Where can I go to meet him? Where can I go and not be noticed? I have to see him again, she prayed. Suddenly, she knew there was only one place possible, safe from prying eyes. Min walked slowly along the coastal path, gathering wild flowers as she had done as a child. Blue harebells, golden fetchlings, honey-scented bedstraw, clover to make a posy for Agnes's grave. At the crossroads, close to Ballinotter Point, was the little cemetery set on a hillock where the weathered gravestones with backs to the sea looked out over the island eastwards. It was a peaceful spot to sit and mull over all that was happening in her heart. It must have been some sixth sense that brought Ewan to the window of the manse, from where he could see a girl in a faded cotton frock gathering flowers from the macher. Months away from home had made him hungry for its timeless beauty. The brightness of the sun on water, the white sands, shimmering waves frilled with white spume, the diving terns and the kittiwakes, the carpets of flowers. Fetry was all the colours of the rainbow. It was crisscrossed by just a few roads strung with white cottages, streamlined for life against the gales. Harsh in winter. But spring came early, and now there was such beauty. Min was part of his island, and he must speak to her again. He shot down the stairs of the manse, through the back door that led to the wrought iron gate, onto the path. He knew where she was heading, and this time he did not turn from the side of her, as he had once, years ago, but squatted down by her side as she placed the flowers in the little urn. He could hardly breathe for the nearness of her. "I'm glad you've not forgotten her," he whispered. "It never goes away from you, does it? What happened all those years ago? I'm glad I've caught you here. I do so want to explain. It troubled me that we never talked about the accident. When I saw you here all those years ago, I flunked it. I should never have taught you both to swim. I blame myself. I gather you were shunned in the school after I left. I'm sorry. Say no more, Ewan. It's all in the past, and we cannot hold the tide by wishing of it," she replied, her blue eyes staring into his. "Aggie was your friend. I wanted to clear the air. No one knows but us how it all happened. Agnes wouldn't have wanted us to go on punishing ourselves, would she?" He must have looked so sad that Min reached out to touch him, but drew back blushing. "To tell the honest truth, I've no memory of it still. Just flashes and sounds," she confessed, and rose to brush down her skirt and make for the road. "Don't go yet, Min. I've not told you how much I enjoyed your singing last night. You looked like a mermaid in the moonlight singing a siren song to lonely sailors. Do you remember how you used to sing to the seals and we laughed and called you Dame Nellie Melba?" He smiled, feeling his pulse racing. "It was good of you to speak to me when you were with your friends. I thought you would have forgotten those days before Agnes." Ewan drew to his full height and gazed down at her. "How could I forget my old sparring partner? They're good memories with the bad men. I would have asked you to join us, but you know how it is." His voice trailed into an apologetic mutter. "Is Joanna your sweetheart?" she blurted out, being still as blunt and direct as she was as a child. "Not exactly. We've always been chums. We write to each other. Our families are friendly. I suppose one day they expect we'll... But the war will change everyone's plans." He was trying to be honest with her. "I see. Min gulped, drawing back her gaze from him. Have you anyone special to be dancing with? Ewan sounded casual, but he was anxious to know the truth. Min, to his relief, shook her head. I'm waiting for all the boys in blue to fill the island, and then I'll take my pick, she laughed. Be careful, some of those chaps can be tricky. Here today, gone tomorrow. Ewan's face grew stern. Now he had found her, he didn't want to share her with anyone. Like you sailors with a girl in every port, then. Don't worry, I can take care of myself. I have to go. Min turned for the path, but he blocked her way. Do you fancy a walk later? Down to the cove, not down where we were, but to the singing beach in the hidden valley. The flowers are still blooming fine. I have to go to church again with Mother, but yes, later. Min answered, clearly surprised by this unexpected invitation. I'll wait for you after church, by the finger post, and we'll catch up on all you've been up to since I've been away. You can tell me all the gossip then. See you soon. He made a mock salute and touched her arm. He could feel sparks shooting from where his fingers pressed her sunburnt skin. Tonight it is, she laughed, bounding down the path like a puppy. It would not be long before the whole island knew where the minister's son was walking out, and who with, but he didn't care. The weeks sped by in a dreamlike trance for Min as their paths crossed and recrossed until they stopped making lame excuses and accepted that there was a serious attraction. She was packing messages into a box for the weekly orders in the grocery storeroom when Ewan appeared from nowhere with a bunch of garden roses. These are for your mother. And can you come to tea tomorrow after work? I want you to come to the manse and meet the folks. It's time we all got together. No more skulking in coves and corners. I'm going to ask your mother if you can come. When Min got home from Kilfetrish, her mother was in a flurry of consternation after this unexpected visitation. The roses were stuck in Keller marmalade jars in pride of place. To think you're walking out with a minister's son. Susan McKinnon will know like that, to be sure. Her son cavorting with a cotter, Ailey sighed. Mind what you say. Say nothing but sit straight and don't shame yourself. I dare say you know how to behave yourself in a parlour, but you're going against the natural order of things. Not that he's no a braw young man and kind wit. You could do far worse, but mind, he's a sailor and away soon to fight a war. Don't pin your hopes too much on it, Magui. For days before the visit, she searched through the small case of clothes she had rescued from Lady Rose's cast-offs. Even though it was warm, she chose a fine woolen jumper and a skirt that needed the hem letting down and patching. She brushed her hair into a modest coil. It was important to give the right impression that this Cotter girl knew how to dress for company. She found herself sitting in the manse parlour stiffly, trying to hold her cup and saucer with care, trying not to stare at the clutter of books and papers, prints and photographs, trying not to look at Agnes, who was staring out of a silver frame with her black ringlets and serious look, overseeing all the proceedings. Susan McKinnon sat like a ramrod, eyeing the visitor's every movement with disapproval, sapping Min's confidence until she could only squeak when she was spoken to. Ewan tells me you visit Agnes's grave, Minna. That's good of you. It must be hard to live with such an event on your conscience, said the minister's wife, making Min want to rush out of this stuffy room. But she bowed her head and said nothing. What Mother means to say is that none of us can forget such a terrible accident, Ewan interrupted, staring at his mother with dismay. Min is helping out at the stores and Mr. Niven is teaching her to drive the van in case he's called up. Do you intend to join the forces then? Mrs. McKinnon ignored his pleasantries, looking at her with expectation. I think I'll be needed here now that Uncle Niall has to go away. Ah, yes, Niall McPhee. We've not seen him in church for many a year. Do you think it wise for a woman to drive a vehicle? It may come to the wearing of breeks. I'm after thinking, and That is an indecent proposition, don't you think? Min swallowed her tea, feeling like a skivvy caught on her knees, scrubbing the grand hall, out of place, out of her depth in this venomous atmosphere. Then she saw the figurine and smiled. What a lovely piece of porcelain, Mrs. McKinnon. Do you mind if I take a closer look? Help yourself, but don't drop it. It's Sèvres. Min grasped the figurine firmly and looked at its mark with enthusiasm. Actually, I think it may be a Chelsea piece. Look at the anchor mark. She saw the glare on the minister's wife's face and knew she'd said the wrong thing. I see they taught you something then at the Crannog. It's only a trinket. Does it matter who made it? There was a deafening pause, and Ewan passed round a plate of shortbread. Min was in no doubt now that Susan McKinnon was not happy with her son's choice of girlfriend. She was going through the motions for the sake of propriety. They were all relieved when the maid took out the tea tray, and Ewan made excuses for them to escape into the sunshine to forget this grilling. I'm sorry. I thought she'd be pleased for us. I thought she would soften when she met you properly. It was a pity Father was out on call. I'm sure he would have welcomed you more warmly. She was embarrassed by his apology. It doesn't matter, Ewan. Min shrugged her shoulders. It was only to be expected in this narrow little island that tongues would wag and fingers would point at this unexpected courtship. Then suddenly the weeks of waiting were over, and Ewan's call back to base was days away. They walked in silence, knowing this was their last night together, strolling slowly towards their favourite beach, only too aware of the power growing between them. Min sensed that this glorious summer was coming to an end. The tide was turning, and Ewan would leave and perhaps never return. She couldn't bear to think about not seeing his face every day. Since he had made her special, walked her around the island proudly, she felt as if the everyday world going on around them, crofters harvesting the fields, fishermen at their nets and children playing tag, faded into a grey mist. Even her own boring duties just drifted in this trance. Only once did she think of Joanna McCallum, waiting patiently for Ewan in her father's house, wondering why his visits had dried up so suddenly. How could she know that Ewan was always for her alone? Only when he was by her side could she see clearly, breathe deeply, but his days were numbered on the island and his leave was ending. She didn't dare count how many hours they had left. Soon he would sail for the mainland or maybe overseas. She was digging into every moment, clinging to his strong body, afraid it would vanish like the morning mist. They lay in the sand dunes in the hideaway cove named in Gaelic Trigun and Shine, beach of the singing winds, a deserted beach where few locals ever bothered to fish. Ewan was fingering her hair in wonderment. No one else has hair as white as yours. It's like spun gold, made from the sun and the moon. Your mother's dark, so is it your father that we must thank for such mermaid's hair? All of Fetri must know who my father was but me. My mother will not say, but your father must know him, she replied. Ewan shook his head. You were born before we came here. I doubt if he knows anything. They must think badly of me, Min sighed. Don't care what they think. It's what we think that matters. Will you write to me every day? And when we're old, we can read our letters to each other again, he said, staring out to sea. Think of this war as just an interruption. If only it were. I'm afraid, Ewan. What will happen to us? What if you don't return? Those dreadful words were let loose out of her mouth into the air. Just remember, we were meant for each other, you and I, sealed by the sea and the waves. When I first heard you singing, and when I saw you dancing on the shore, I've not been a saint. There have been other girls, but I knew there'd never be anyone to match you. It's simple. Who cares who your father is, or was, or has been? We can make our own destiny, you and I. Write to me every day. Promise. I'll leave you lots of stamps. I'll buy up all the stamps at the post office and shock poor Miss McFadgen with my need for them." He lay back, fingering up her back, making her shiver. "I'll join the Navy and follow you to sea, so I will. Perhaps your mother will think better of me then." Min had no intention now of being left behind. "No," Ewan said firmly. "You must stay here and support your mother. I want to know you're safe, here for me to come home to one day. There will be much to do when the men leave. Women like you will have to see to the land and the boats. You'll be sorely needed here. Promise me you'll never leave the island. Stay here for me. I couldn't bear if anything to harm you now that we've found each other, McGoy. Promise me." They knelt on the warm sands of Trigunanshine and held hands. She looked into those dark eyes, meaning every word of her vow. "I, Minna McPhee, promise to stay here and wait for your return. I swear on Agnes's grave that I will keep this promise with the help of God," she whispered. Ewan held her face in his hands. "And I, Ewan George McKinnon, promise to return to you, all of a piece. Then I'll never leave you again. That's my solemn promise." They kissed each other to seal this vow. "If I had a ring, I'd be giving it to you, here and now," he said. "I need no ring to know you mean every word you say." Min smiled into his eyes. They kissed each other shyly, tenderly. But then the kissing grew more urgent and deep, as if they were melting into each other. Harder and more passionate until Min was dizzy and drunk with happiness, holding him ever closer into her body, feeling the fire of his response until all her mother's dire warnings exploded like a firework in her head, and she drew back. "No, no. Never turn your back on a man. Do not let him near your body. Yield not to temptation." Her mother's warning was shouting in her ear. Now she knew what temptation was all about. It was about lying in the sand under the stars. It was kissing the salt and sand from Ewan's lips and his neck and his chest. It was about strange stirrings between her legs and a longing to be joined together like a fierce magnetic force. It was begging time to stand still, feeling the warmth of his beating heart, drowning in his black eyes, drawing him ever closer into her body. "No, no!" Min was afraid. "We'd better go." Min sat up brusquely, shaking the sand from her lap. Ewan grabbed her arm. "Do we have to? I'm so comfortable here with you. The sun is still setting and the moon creeps slowly. Plenty of time yet to seal our vow. I won't harm you, Min. Don't be scared. There will be other nights than this when I come on leave. I'll take you to Oban to see the stores and the town and the trains. That's another promise," he whispered, putting his arm around her, drawing her down again to his side. "All these bright promises," Min shivered, feeling a sudden chill. "Hold me, Ewan. Hold me so tight. I'm afraid." "I'll hold you forever, Min McPhee. Don't you be worrying over me." She curried into his broad chest, watching the purple twilight between day and night, listening to the wish of the water on the gravel, begging the evening sun not to set over the horizon. "I don't know why I'm after feeling this fear. But just hold me, Ewan, please," she said, feeling the tears stinging her eyes. Why was this world going mad around them? They were little more than children thrown into a whirlwind, powerless against the magnetic force of a world at war. Now she had found him. How could she let him go? Chapter 4. Normandy, 1942. "Keep that bloody stern up, McKinnon!" yelled a sergeant major's voice in his ears. 10 tired men in a dory with a conked-out engine rowed desperately away from the French shoreline, backs bent double in a frantic rhythm, hoping against hope they would make their rendezvous somewhere in the open sea. Ewan was fighting his exhaustion and fear as the dawn light was streaking to the east, exposing the raiders to the guns along the concrete coast. From the start, the mission had been a total cock-up. 2 injured men, one having to be left behind to the mercy of the Boche. Nothing had gone right, and now they were rowing for their lives with only fitness and anger fueling the power of their strokes. Ewan watched the sweat pouring from the back and front, knowing he must distract his mind away from bursting lungs and the cramp in his legs. He must not let the others down. He looked at the grimaces on the faces around him, streaked with black grease paint, black hoods bobbing, eyes blinking with blank, fixed stares. Each man was fighting his own private battle to survive, with only the discipline and months of training for just such an escape on their side. Was this what it was all about? Those months at the White House on the Isle of Arran, based at the shooting lodge of the Duke of Montrose? One of a bunch of raw recruits, all scruffy Herberts and oddballs who wanted to be a part of the new Special Boat Squadron section of the Royal Marines, a secret force selected from volunteers mad enough to want more action behind enemy lines after the fall of Dunkirk. Now they were putting all those back-breaking exercises into practice. Think about Arran. All those bloody exercises, the pain and cunning. Ewan was panting to himself. Think about that daft professor who cycled 500 miles on his old tin bike to show them all the delights of seaweed. The grimaces of revulsion on some of their faces as they tasted hedge salads, seagull eggs, and raw kelp for the first time made Ewan grin to himself. He recalled how in desperation they had paid a local fisherman to smuggle them sole and lobster and scallops for a secret feast over an open fire. Then there was the old Kylach who cursed them from profaning the Sabbath as they skimmed up the cliffs and scared the sheep, creeping about under cover of darkness on the leeward side of paths to avoid sniffing farm dogs and insomniacs. They were a team of raiders, invisible, silent, a lethal bunch lurking in caves, under rocks, canoeing for miles with a ton of demolition equipment in their backpacks, each individual with his own expertise, his own method of surprise and attack, his own way of disposing of the enemy. The training was tough. It had to be. At every stage, men fell by the wayside, disappearing back to former regiments. Only the fittest survived, the loners and the wiry nonconformists. And now his life depended on this motley crew of misfits from all ranks and none. They were being put to the ultimate test. Ewan had earned his place as a canoe-cum-beach recce specialist, swimming offshore to test the depths and quality of the shoreline, plumbing the seabed to test the graduations and shelving at 20-yard intervals, while his mate was on the beach taking sand samples, each looking out for the other until they swam back to the rendezvous boat to put their information on the waiting chart. On his last recce off the coast of Dieppe, he had found no safe shelving beach but a jagged spit of rocks and was battered by waves ripping his canoe. It had been a struggle to complete the task, to avoid guards on the lookout. Only when the beach had been examined could they swim back to the waiting boat. Now their skipper was flashing his torch, hoping to goodness the rendezvous boat would loom out of the darkness and haul them all aboard for mugs of hot coffee laced with navy rum. Why do we keep putting ourselves in these crazy places, he thought, while spurring on his effort, not wanting to slacken the strike rate. He pretended he was a kid again, paddling like fury around the Fétry coast. Had he not been risking his neck on the sea for as long as he could remember? The sea was his obsession. Ocean-going ships did nothing for him. He liked to be close to the restless water, to his kindred spirit, feeling the spray and the waves underneath him, testing his strength against the elements like some human seal swimming and sunbathing on the rocks. He could see the little tent he had made out of a sail, feel the rough surface and his nights under a stretch of sky and stars. He discovered that the two-seater canoe was his second skin, light and transportable, silent and easy to conceal. Damn his long legs. They had nearly cost him his selection to the squadron, but his overall wiriness and sea legs were giving him a chance now to prove his worth. They were all rowing for their life. No one on Fetri knew his true unit. He still wore his old naval uniform, fabricating manoeuvres and excuses why he was still on dry land. Administrative duties, mapping convoys were what his family thought he was doing. If his mother wondered at his weather-beaten muscular wiriness, his reticence about this office job and the bruises appearing after each bad parachute jump, she said nothing. If only they would accept Min as his unofficial fiancé. But they were still tight-lipped about her and guarded in their opinion of her worth. How could it ever be after Agnes's death? He could see it strained their Christian duty to be pleasant when he brought her home for tea. Min tried her best to please, sitting so pale and shy, her manners impeccable as Mother tried to be polite. She was not blind, reading the "not good enough for our son" plastered across Mother's furrowed brow. She was working as a postal assistant, helping Miss McFadden and driving a voluntary mobile canteen for the construction crews building the new aerodrome, serving teas and snacks around the island in the rickety van in all weathers. Her letters hinted at all the new concrete buildings and barracks that soon would bring thousands of airmen and crews to Fetri. The very thought of Min was spurring him on, firing his aching arms with new resolve. She was his girl, and he was proud of her. On his last leave, he was the first person allowed to take her abroad, to Oban to stay with his aunt, chaperoned by a nervous Ailey McPhee. He would never forget that look of pure astonishment on her face when she saw the tiers of houses rising up from Oban Harbour, the crowds bustling around the harbour watching their arrival, the fishing fleet and the car traffic. The streets were full of fine shops, and the rows of terraced houses rising up the hill with such gracious splendour amazed her. "When do all these people go away?" Min asked. "They don't," Ewan smiled, recalling the look of incredulity on her face as she browsed in the shop windows. That was what he loved about her, that look of delight in those blue eyes over the simplest of outings. They dined in cafes and in the hotel. She watched the soldiers and servicemen with girls laughing on their arms going into the public bars. She practiced her English slowly in the shops, and he was thrown by such a pukka accent, each word slowly pronounced in an English accent with no trace of a Highland lilt. They found an antique shop up a side street full of old furniture and ancient pictures. He wanted to buy her something special as a memento, clothing, a hat, but she turned her nose up at his suggestions, preferring to ferret amongst the old junk until she found an ornament, a china figurine. "Look, Ewan, this is what I want." It was a sentimental piece, a shepherdess and boy entwined round a tree. "You can start off my collection for my hope chest," she laughed. He wanted to buy her the sun and the moon, but most of all an antique ring, an aquamarine to match her eyes, clustered with seed pearls. But she had eyes only for the ornament, and it cost hardly anything. Then the visit came to an end in Oban Station, as he headed south and she went back home on the SS Hebrides with her mother, carrying her precious purchases as if they were the crown jewels. They clung together as Min sobbed into his coat, great gulps of tears. Ewan could taste the salt tears in her kisses. This was why he was fighting. For Min and Fetri and the goodness and beauty of all they stood for. They rode on in the darkness, faces grimacing with pain. It might be sentimental bosh, but he believed in justice and that right would prevail. His secret warfare was dirty and violent. Smash and grab raids were rush jobs with knives and grenades. However covert the mission, it let Jerry know that Britain had not given up the fight. Cross-channel surprise attacks were a reminder that someday soon armed forces would be coming back to France for good. His chosen work was fraught with danger, chances of survival often slim. But what the hell? Someone had to do it. Ewan wondered how many of his 9 lives he had used up. He thought about his first raid on a radar station close to Cherbourg. The plan was to snatch enemy troops to see what calibre of man was guarding the coast. They stormed aboard the motorboat so confidently, squeezed in the hull, and were buffeted by the waves until they were reduced to retching into buckets, staggering ashore to scramble up cliffs with a Bren gun, all set to cut the telegraph wires. That was the plan, but reality was so different. There were too many guards, and the coastal defences were too thick. They abseiled back down under cover of darkness, empty-handed, and sped back over the channel with frustration. Other recce's along the bay of the Seine had been more successful, but tonight's had been a bloody disaster. The patrol had been parachuted low, while 2 Whitley bombers took the flak above them. They were supposed to land in a stubble field near Saint-Valery-en-Caux, but somehow most of them had overshot the target. Precious time was wasted in gathering in stray parachutes and finding each other in the dark. They were camouflaged in combat jackets, netted hoods and grease-painted faces. A hidden dinghy with supplies had to be found and hidden under the rocks, so that the men could begin the beach recce and take samples and measurements. The routine descent down the cliff injured 2 men badly, and then they realised they were some 7 kilometres away from the rendezvous boat. There was little time left to do a decent job as they crept along the coast, dragging their wounded. Eventually they made for the waiting dory, but the damn engine cut out, and there was nothing for it but to strip off and paddle her out. Far in the distance blinked a flashlight from the motor transport. "Hurry up!" came the signal, for it was almost dawn. Ewan lifted his gaze. Surely the boat was almost out of danger now. Then a searing flash of light was bearing down on them with a sickening splatter of gunfire from a patrol boat. The dory rose up into the air with a swell, tipping the crew sideways into the water as bullets ripped the surface. Ewan dived down for cover, his eardrums bursting with the roar and commotion. The rest was a blur of flashing lights and screeching voices. It was every man for himself now. He did not fancy spending the rest of the war in the bag, so he took another lungful of air and dived down into darkness. He would head out to sea and take his chance. There must be some hiding place from that cursed searchlight. He was swimming offshore, drifting with the tide. The sea was still warm, buoying him gently back and forth into the inky blackness. But streaks of dawnlight were rising higher in the east. His mind was spinning from panic to calm. He knew he was tiring, but tiredness meant death, and he wanted to stay alive. How he wanted to stay alive, but the sea was warm and oily drowsiness would soon overcome his strength of will. In the darkness, he could hear voices calling, Gallic voices. As he floated helplessly now, the sea cailleachs, sirens of the deep, calling him down to play with them. "No!" Ewan spat the salt water from his lips. "You canna have me. You've had Agnes. You're no having my bones." Every stroke was an effort of will, but the voices called out louder, and he tried to struggle as the arm came up to drag him under. "No! Ach, away with you!" The arm was too strong and held him fast. Chapter 5. RAF Fetri, 1942. When the postie volunteered for the army, Min McPhee wasted no time in volunteering to drive his old van. Archie the blacksmith gave her extra lessons, and soon she collected deliveries from the ferry and bumped her way around the island, trying to eke out their meagre petrol ration. Driving came easily, for she had the confidence of youth and the wings of love at her heels. All the wolf whistles and calls from the construction crews just rolled off her as she delivered mail to the civilian gangs and took orders for filled rolls and pastries. It was hard to persuade her fearful mother to be a passenger for a tour of the island in the van. Ailey surveyed all the concrete hangars and huts with horror. "Yon's a very Sodom and Gomorrah, breathing fire over our heads night and day. To be sure, there'll be trouble for us. We'll no be safe in our beds," she said. At the same time, she was proud of her daughter's connection to the minister's son. It gave her new purpose in rising from her bed to sweep the floor, milk the cow, collect the eggs for her basket, and hold her head a little higher in the stores. Min was going to marry above herself, so she was. The coming of an airbase to Fetri was bringing new life and prosperity to the islanders. There were billeting fees, extra provisions ordered, extra whiskey for the bar. A city of grey concrete was erected in the middle of the island, with its own piped water and electricity. Tarmacadam roads replaced the dirt tracks, with lookout posts and Nissen hut barracks lined up alongside. It was rumoured that there would be more airmen than civilians living on the island, and many more men than girls, news of which worried many a crofter husband and father alike. "You must keep busy and your eyes forward and don't give temptation any encouragement," warned Ailey every time Min left for work. "Where men and maids meet, oft comes mischief, and there's plenty wee Jezebels on this island, with time in their hands to make plenty mischief. Mark my words." "Oh, Mother, why must you take the joy out of everything? Why is it so wrong to enjoy a crack or two with the airmen? They are such gentlemen," Min argued. The airbase was bringing life to this dull place, with servicemen in jaunty caps, whistling and waving. "Get them on their own and you'll soon find they're no Christian men. These gentlemen of yours, only after one thing. I'm after thinking. Even from a girl who is spoken for, there is only joy in heaven after the work is done and sins are paid for, Magui. Don't go looking for pleasure in this life. I've never found any. That's because you don't open your eyes and see the beauty all around you. The flowers and music and the dancing. Why don't you mix more with your neighbours?" Min pleaded, sensing her mother was lonely with only her spinning wheel and knitting for company. "I live as my church says I must live, separated from the world's wicked ways. It is the only true preparation for the life ahead when we, the chosen ones, shall be as new creatures in the eyes of the Lord. Not frail sinners at his mercy every hour of the day. Get you to your work and mind what I say." There was no talking sense to her mother when she was in this mood, and Min was glad to leave the gloom of their four walls for the brightness of the day. She lived for Ewan's letters, savouring each page, reading them over and over again until she knew them by heart. She always called into the manse when they arrived to share his news, sensing that his letters to them were shorter and more dutiful. She dusted the little figurine with care each morning until it sparkled in the sunshine from the tiny window of her box room. With each rub, she made a wish for his safe return. Driving the mobile canteen van grew from the island's first haphazard catering effort to supplying teams of builders each day. Then it was formalised into a special post by representatives of the Women's Rural Institute. They thought a single girl far too young and flighty to be let loose on her own among airmen, but everyone knew of Min's unofficial engagement and felt she could be trusted not to seduce the workers and jeopardise the war effort. Min took this job seriously, checking her engine, her supplies and the dates on her pass onto the site as if she was on a mission. Hers was the neatest, cleanest canteen. All her old training at the Cranach stood her in good stead. She collected fresh supplies of home baking when rations would allow. 4-far bridies, sausage rolls, jam tarts and shortbread. Everything was labelled up and stacked neatly in her own military operation. Once the flap was lowered for a shelf, the urn brought to a boil, and the cakes and snacks displayed under lacy cloths, to shield them from the dust, there was just room for a slim whippet of a girl to stand behind and take orders. Sometimes Min's own daily trip around the island was held up by lines of supply vehicles jamming the tracks just off the ferry transport. She would park up in a passing place until the sand settled down. Then there were grouses and grumbles if her van was late for a shift. In all weathers, she wore sensible overalls and a turban round her hair, even when her feet were frozen and the van was rocking in the westerly gale. Standards were kept up and nothing was stored away until it was washed up, polished, mirrored until sparkling and all her surfaces spotless. Then the crockery was boxed and strapped up, the shelf raised, and the van locked for another morning. She was getting to know all her regular customers' likes and dislikes. She tried to provide a variety of biscuits, but supplies were erratic, especially when the boat could not land. Then an SOS call went out to the island bakers to do their bit. She never let the men down, even if all that was left on the shelf was a cheery smile and fresh gossip as they warmed cold hands on a hot mug of Bovril. This was a safe little cocoon she was building around her promise to Ewan. Being useful in her own sphere was valuable war work and worthy of respect. She saw herself in the service of her country. Does not an army march on its stomach? Fetri was far removed from the horrors of bombings and blitz on the Clyde and the terrible carnage among the convoys crossing the Atlantic. But familiar names were appearing in the casualty list in the Oban Times nevertheless. Then came that terrible accident when a Halifax doing its routine training of circuits and bumps stalled when coming into land. She'd been serving teas and watched in horror as it crashed in flames on the beach. The smoke could be seen across the island, and people came running thinking Hitler had landed. 8 good men were incinerated in a tin coffin. Such a waste. She had worked through the night to keep the investigators plied with warm tea, feeling sick at the thought that the young men would be buried in coffins filled with sand. Min polished her porcelain each night like a talisman, safe in the knowledge that Ewan was protected by her daily rituals, until the night when the minister stood in the doorway of the cottage, dripping with rain from his oilskin cape. She was hoping for a letter in his pocket, until she saw his face drained of all expression. Minna, Mahoy. Bad news, I'm afraid. Min led him to the fireside, to Uncle Niall's empty chair, and Mother poked the fire nervously at this unexpected visit. What's happened? It's Ewan, isn't it? Min's voice quivered. His silence was frightening her. Reverend McKinnon nodded sadly, his cheeks sunken and his mouth tight with controlled emotion. He looked an old man in the firelight, trying to hold back his tears. You'll have to be brave. Ewan is missing, presumed drowned in some action at sea. I have few details. The telegram said nothing more. What ship was he on? Was it sunk? Min's voice seemed to come from far away. She was standing rooted to the rug like a wooden post, unable to move. I don't think he was sunk. It is something to do with the marine units. Some hush-hush encounter. We knew he was doing undercover work. He never said much, only hinted, but obviously no one will tell us. Then he could have been taken prisoner, Min insisted, stunned by the discovery of Ewan's secret war work. The boat was hit, child. No one survived. This much I was told when I rang. At this bleak news, Ailey started to wail, rocking and moaning in the old way, back and forth, distracting them with little moans. Wait, Mother, let's hear him out. Min was cold with fury. How can they be sure? He could have been picked up in a lifeboat. Where did it happen? She knew all about the air-sea rescue units scattered around the islands that went out in search of pilots and crews ditched in the Atlantic, and the aeroplanes that skimmed the surface of the water to spot life rafts. There had been some spectacular rescues. It was not that sort of operation, child. I fear we'll never know the truth of the matter, he whispered, trying to hold back his tears. And poor Mistress McKinnon to be losing her 2 bairns. How is she the now? Ailey shook her head in disbelief. We've put her to bed with a draft from the doctor. It was seemingly to be telling you before the rest of the parish. I'm so sorry, child. Min stood rigid, stabbing her chest with her fists. He's not feeling dead. Not here in my heart. I would be knowing in here if he was gone. Until there's proof, I shall go on hoping. The sea shan't have him, she cried. Don't build on false hopes, Magoi. The fall is always the harder to bear. Better to accept now and move forward slowly, replied the minister, shaking his head. But we don't know for certain. Until I know for sure. Thank you for telling me. I know I was never your first choice for a daughter-in-law. Minna, remember who it is you're speaking to, snapped her mother, bowing her head with embarrassment. The truth is told and the devil shamed. I speak as I find. We loved each other from the start, Ewan and I. Don't make me give him up for the dead yet. Hope is all I have to cling to. I shall call on Mistress McKinnon when she feels able to receive me. You do understand? Yes, of course. Believe what you must, but the Lord will guide you in due course. We shall be praying that you are right and we are wrong. The minister rose and made for the door. It is a pity the good Lord could not have guided Ewan's boat to safety in the first place, Min thought, as she bowed her head, but bit her lip. Thank you for coming, Minister. He paused at the door, looking her straight in the eye. This is not an occasion for Thanksgiving, I'm after thinking. The man stooped under the lintel, out into the rain. Men marched out the next day to the Trigunenshine, to their special beach, where memories of Ewan were strong. She scoured the grey-green sea for comfort, watching the tide racing over the sands, throwing seaweed and flotsam over the shingle. She stood like a finger of rock, battered by the wind, unbending in her anger. If his spirit was waiting for her there, she would know. There was no one there. Listen to me! The sea shan't have him! She cried into the wind, clutching onto their love token, polishing it with a cloth like Aladdin's lamp. Ewan can't be dead. His name must never be scratched on the war memorial. He's just missing. No news was good news. How could such a strong swimmer, a human seal, and such a survivor not find his way out of the sea to return home again? He must come back. Her whole happiness depended on it. Then she thought of his sister, Agnes. She must take flowers to the grave and beg his sister to help them bring Ewan back to Fetri once more. Word soon flew around the island of the fate of the minister's son, and the gossips clacked and turned to eye Min with pity, and not a little relief. It did not do for Cotter girls to get above themselves in marriage. Min stood behind her counter, stoically refusing to be comforted. He was still alive. She could feel his pulse in her heart. She rattled along the dirt track, planning all sorts of crazy schemes to rescue him. First, she would join the Wrens or the Waffs and go in search of him, but no one was going to tell her where to look. He had lied to her about the nature of his posting. She had thought, as the Islanders, that he was in the Navy. Now she was told he was in the Marines. There were news of daring raids on French shipping ports. Was it in one of these escapades that he had been lost? Perhaps he was wandering alone, dazed and in danger. One of these days he would roll off the Hebrides with his knapsack over his shoulder like Jolly Jack Tar, his cap stuck at the back of his head, laughing and grinning. She was too busy dreaming to take much notice of the long grey road misted by sea har. There was a slide and a bump and a crunch as her van veered off the track into the watery ditch among the bog grass and the horsetails. In her daydreaming, her concentration had lapsed and her precious van was stuck fast in a rut. She banged on the steering wheel in frustration and burst into tears. Tears long overdue. "You stupid Cailleach! Silly, stupid bitch! Half your crockery will be broken, pastries reduced to crumbs. The back axle probably snapped, the whole van in ruins, and no one will get their 11s. Rivers of tears poured down her face, soaking her handkerchief. She was sobbing as if her heart would break. A face appeared at the window, a worried, leathery face. "Are you all right, miss?" "It's gone off the road. It's all my fault. Oh!" Min babbled in Gaelic, and the face looked puzzled. "She's in a right state. Speaking double Dutch. Have we a tuchter to translate?" Min heard his comment and looked up through her tears. "I can speak the King's English when I have to. Can you please get me out of here?" The young man smiled and touched his cap. "In 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, miss. Just let's be having you out of there." There was a convoy of canvas trucks lined up, with blue berets poking out and men jumping down with ropes. The rope was attached and the van lifted back up onto the straight and narrow track, none the worse for its accident. Min stood there snivelling, feeling foolish, red-faced, mouthing her thanks to everyone in earshot. The young sergeant smiled and showed her the few bumps that would need knocking out. "Just a bash in the wing. You were lucky it didn't turn over. Let's open her up and see if there's any damage inside. I suggest we make a cup of tea and wave these lads on. You look as if you've had a nasty shock, miss." Min could feel herself shivering with shock and relief as she opened the van door and saw that nothing had shifted from its secure shelf. She soon had the water on the boil and the collapsible stool took the weight of her trembling knees. "How can I thank you? My mind wasn't on the job, I'm afraid. Just let's get some sweet tea down you, miss. That's the stuff to give the troops as had a bad turn. Sergeant Broddick at your service," he smiled, holding out his hand, and she clasped it, looking up into a square face with a neat moustache over the lip and warm brown eyes. Not a handsome visage, but open and weathered, creased up like corrugated paper. "I'm Min McPhee." She was still shaking from the shock. "Come out into the fresh air and sit down. We'll soon fix you up a cuppa. The cup that cheers but don't inebriate, as my old mother keeps telling me. But she's never tasted naffy tea. That strong it could fuel a Spitfire." He paused, seeing the smile on her face. "That's better. A smile on your face at last. Don't look so worried. Get that down the hatch." Min sipped the piping hot tea and surveyed her team of rescuers, rolling onwards toward the camp. "Just arrived?" "We have that. A right rum do on the boat. Rocking from side to side. Worse than the Big Dipper at Blackpool. My giddy aunt. My stomach was wrapped round my throat. It's a bit of a bleak hole, if you don't mind me saying so. Just sheep, cows, and a few stone cottages," answered Sergeant Broddick, looking around him with disappointment. "You were lucky to land at all. These September tides are rough," she replied. Well, now, me, I intend to make the most of it, miss. And things is looking up already, don't you think, lads? Sergeant Ken Broddick winked at his driver and crewmates. Min ignored his flirty manner, anxious to be on her way to the far end of the island. Thank you, but I think I'll manage finely now, Sergeant Broddick. Any time, any place, at your service. It was a pleasure to be of assistance. Hope to meet you again, but not in a ditch. Bye-bye, toodle pip, he waved. She climbed back into her van to clean up their mess. Thinking about Ewan was dangerous when she was driving. From now on, she must concentrate on one thing at a time and wait for his return. He was not dead. Of that, she was certain. Chapter 6. France, 1943. Ewan awoke on a mattress of straw covered by a horse blanket. He could hear rustling in the hayloft, suddenly alert to strange surroundings and the sound of the night stable. Where was he? Everything was a blur of images, thrashing in the water, salt in his mouth. Then the arm was grabbing him, pulling him into the boat. He was alive, but where? A stab of pain in his knee jolted him. He could just about finger a rag bandage round his leg. Its throbbing worried him. In the half-light, he saw the enamel jug and glugged down its water with relief. He was feeling hot. His stomach stirred to life. Lying back to assess his predicament, he tried to piece together the raid, the explosion and his rescue. Hellfire! He must still be in France behind enemy lines. The odds against evading capture were stacked against him. In the heat of the escape, he'd had only his life vest and combat trousers and his plimsolls. Where were his belt and his escape equipment? At the bottom of the channel or waiting at some police station? He heard someone climbing the stairs, panting with the effort. An old woman in long black skirt and apron appeared. N'ayez pas peur, mon ami. Vous êtes avec ami. She smiled a toothless grin. Vous parlez français? Pas beaucoup. Ewan answered in his best schoolboy French, struggling to lift himself. How long had he been here? Days, by the smell of him. Vous êtes soldat? He nodded. Mon mari était soldat aussi. Verdun. The widow gave him a chunk of black bread and some cheese, smelling as ripe as his armpits. Merci beaucoup, madame. The pain in his leg made him wince and fall back. Et là! She examined the bloody bandage, shaking her head. Vous restez là. Bientôt, monsieur le curé. Arriverez. He lay back. There was nothing he could do with a festering wound. How on earth had he managed to gash it so badly? It was enough to know the old woman was risking her life in hiding him here. How many others were shielding him? His leg needed attention. Perhaps the priest would bring a doctor and he could be on his way. But how the hell could he move on when he had not the faintest idea where he was heading? The priest came when the sun was high, bringing more bread and cheese and a bottle of good wine. He had a little English, and between them they were able to understand each other. He examined Ewan's wound carefully. The priest called himself André and told him that he would be addressed only as Etienne. You were rescued by fishermen on the coast and passed down the line to us. It is safer you stay here a while longer until all is prepared. I'm afraid there is no one to see your leg. Monsieur le doctor was arrested a month ago. It does not look good for him. Things are rough here in Saint-Eulalie. Many are taken prisoner. The defenses are strong. We wait for the coming of allies, but after the raid on Dieppe, the cure shrugged his shoulders. Ah, well, patience. God alone knows. I will speak to the committee now that you are able to talk. Committee? Ewan looked puzzled. We have to take care. They will ask you questions. They have to be sure before they send you down the line. Let me see the leg. The stench was bad. We'll have to deal with this the old way. I will come back later when I can. He returned when it was dark with hot water and some strips of clean linen. There was a pot of foul-smelling green paste. The priest smiled sadly and apologised. Pardon, Etienne, but is there something we must do first? He produced a jar of writhing maggots. Ewan turned his eyes from the sight of them, trying not to squirm. All his tough special training, eating insects and other unmentionables, but the thought of those creatures on his leg made him feel faint. The cure placed the maggots in the open wound and covered them with the jar. It is primitive, but some of the old ways are the best. They will feed off the pus wound so that we can dress it afresh. Ewan was in no position to protest. He did not want to saw off his own gangrenous leg without anaesthetic. The next day, under cover of darkness and curfew, the room was filled with a bunch of tough-looking men from the village. One of them held a lantern into his face. Your name, rank, and number. Ewan produced his dog tag out of his boot heel. He could not tell them his real commando unit, but his naval cover was sound. We will check that you are who you say you are. Spies are planted on us to break the groups and evasion lines. If we find you at Bosch, you will never leave this barn alive. Ewan nodded weakly, feeling the fever kicking into his system again. Je comprends. A man delved into his pocket for a slip of paper that he shoved under Ewan's nose. Vous dites? The words wobbled before his eyes, but he smiled as he repeated. She sells seashells on the seashore, and the shells she sells are seashells, I'm sure. Adding the extra line for good measure. They seemed to visibly relax at this, but Ewan sensed there were more tests to follow. He was putting all their lives at risk. They had to be sure of him. Why are you here in the Pas de Calais? Asked the leader. Ewan was on guard. Perhaps they were the traitors, waiting to trick him. It was a training exercise. There were difficulties and the engine broke down. A fiasco. How did you get the wound? Suddenly, one of the men crept round behind him and blasted some insult in his ear. Pardon? What the fucking hell was that all about? They all laughed. Just another little test, mon ami. You are definitely English. Non, je suis écossaise. D'Écosse, compris? They smiled, not caring about the difference. Welcome, monsieur. Now we can move you to somewhere more comfortable and try to mend your leg. You cannot go on your way with such a leg ballooning out of your trousers. He was laid on an old door and carried through the woods to the edge of the village, where he was rested in the attic of the cure's presbytery, under the widow Eugenie's watchful eye. The room was sparsely furnished. A bed, a skylight window with shutters, a candle and an old armoire with space for him to crouch in if there was a raid. He was ordered to make no sound night or day. There were those only too willing to report unusual movement in an empty house. For his comfort, there was a marble washstand with a cupboard for his potty. He would have to stay immobile until his wound healed and try to keep up his strength and muscle tone with silent exercises. If his bed-ridden legs grew weak, escape might prove difficult. It was going to be a long and boring convalescence. André brought him tons of ancient books to read and a dictionary for translation. There were some wonderful old illustrations that, in desperation, he had begun to copy on the bare walls to distract himself. He had loved drawing at school, but no one had ever encouraged his talent, thinking it too girlish a hobby for a minister's son. Here he began to fill the walls with pictures of stone cottages and boats, the rigging of sails in Colfetrish harbour, and the faces of his friends and his beloved Min. The cure was amused at this initiative, pointing in admiration to Min. Votre femme? Ewan smiled, putting his hands together in prayer. Not yet, but soon. When I go home. The cure himself took his own sketchpad and pencil when he travelled over his parish hamlets, close to the coast. He tried to memorise any coastal defence systems and gun enforcements visible from his parish round. These he drew carefully, stuffing the paper down the spine of his misel, which was passed under the noses of guards and millis down the line of known resistance workers. They were trying to accrue as much useful information as possible to help in the final assault on the coast of the Pas-de-Calais. Ewan was impatient to get stronger and fitter, and he began to exercise in his room, pacing the floor, bending and squatting, standing on his head and hands to strengthen his shoulders and arms. How had Eugenie managed to find such food for him? There was fruit and ham, bread and hot, nourishing broths that lined his stomach and brought colour back to his sunken cheeks. How could he ever repay his hosts for such generosity? Only by getting fit and leaving them quickly to distemper over the evidence of his stay in the attic. Sometimes he was allowed to roam the woods at night, silently tracing the secret poacher's path that twisted around the village to avoid patrols and guards. The committee met in the isolated farmhouse of Monsieur Didier. Here the group planned their offences, one small link in a larger chain of resistance, and Maquis operated around the towns and cities, in the forests and villages. If only Ewan had found another canoeist from the squadron on the run, another survivor, they could have attempted to paddle back across the channel. Others had made such attempts when the tides and weather were favourable. Weakened and alone, it was unthinkable. Soon he would be passed along the secret escape line, putting so many others' lives at risk. Yet Ewan was tempted to delay his escape and put his wits alongside the Maquis, using his training to teach them demolition tricks. It was the least he could do. He begged the cure to let him stay. It's not safe for you to stay. There is already suspicion in the village. It is enough for us to know we have helped one more soldier to return to fight once more. That is our reward. Tomorrow you will leave. Take care. Trust no one. Use your instinct. If something feels wrong, avoid it. At dusk, I will take you through the forest, where someone will come out to meet you with the password. You have no papers or identity. You must not go near an open road. It will be a long walk for you. God be with you. How can I thank you? Ewan was almost in tears. Get yourself back safely to your island, and return one day to see us when victory is ours. May the cross of Lorraine be your guide. The priest raised his hand in a blessing. As Ewan dressed in his thick trousers and pullover and borrowed boots like a farm labourer, his black beret pulled over his eye. He knew he was dark enough to pass as a Frenchman, except that his accent would let him down. Someone surely had transmitted his position by now to Britain. Once his family and Min knew he was safe, perhaps he could make himself useful to the next resistance group and earn his rescue. His folks in Fettrie would understand this delay. He was passed slowly from village to village, hidden under sacking in vans, walking kilometres on his gammy leg through dense forests. His papers were basic. He was posing as a wounded soldier, now doing agricultural labour. The documents claimed that he was deaf in one ear and not very bright. They would not pass tight scrutiny. It was a time of despair and betrayal in the countryside. Only in villages was he protected from discovery. In a small village, the resistance knew who was for them and who was a possible informer. He was tested and checked over many times. Sometimes he was allowed to go out on the reception committee to torch in a Lysander dropping supplies or a secret agent. He taught young boys how to make fuses and detonators, to lay explosives on the rail track, to swim under bridges and place charges. There were hit-and-run raids on isolated guard patrols, but the consequences of such offences were appalling for the local village. Hostages were shot in reprisal. His schoolboy French quickly became rough and fluent, but his accent was unfit to be spoken in public without arousing suspicion. He lived rough in the woods where his survival training made him an excellent scout. Sometimes they holed up in shepherds' huts, roasted birds over fires, sleeping by day, moving by night. Sometimes, when there was paper, he found himself sketching the black, weary faces of his amis, firelight drawings to amuse that were thrown on the fire just in case. He played with scenes of home in his head, the colours of the island, the textures of pebbles on the shore, so different from this world of the greenwood and darkness. Rules were strict and punishments harsh. There could be no risks. If the signs outside a house were wrong, the curtains closed instead of open, the bottles on the wrong step, they would make long detours, criss-crossing their tracks to see if they'd been trailed. Their small raids would not alter the course of world action, but cutting telephone wires and sabotaging points and tracks slowed down the enemy in the region. Making a nuisance of themselves spelt out that there were those whose day would soon come again. Many months after his rescue, when winter had set into the forest, Ewan awoke to hear the repeated hooting of some imitation owl from the loft of the farmhouse hideout. He was up and dressed in seconds, shinning up onto the roof, his eyes straining to see a line of grey uniforms snaking up the path towards the ruined farmhouse. His companions were down the back of the roof and into the forest along a trail before the searchlight would beam out on their escape. Ewan could feel himself sweating, but strangely clear-headed. If he was caught, he would be shot. His progress through France had been untroubled so far. Now came the day of reckoning, and he had a head start. It was planned that he should race on alone towards the river, and, should anything happen, get himself out of the region as quickly as he could, and make for the southwest coast of France. At least he knew this present terrain. Ewan always felt safer close to water, and he knew where there was a small dinghy hidden, but, to his dismay, the boat was not in its usual place. Had they been betrayed by one of their group? Was someone now screaming out in agony the names of their cell? There was nothing for it but to swim across the chilly water, strip off his clothes and, tying them in a bundle around his neck, lie them on his back. Ewan sensed sniffer dogs making their way through the wood. He hoped the others had managed to make their way to a pre-arranged rendezvous for just such an emergency. Nothing had been left to chance, but he wondered why the Jerrys were on a manhunt. Had some aeroplane ditched and they were hunting for a crew of airmen? Had some sabotage plan gone wrong? Thank God no one used real names. Real names meant death and torture. You couldn't reveal what you didn't know, could you? He prayed he'd never find out. The chill of the water numbed him for a second, but it was fast-flowing and he struggled to ford a straight line. The current was forcing him forward and he thought of Agnes and his own fear of drowning. This was the third time he had been at the mercy of the water. Would his luck hold? He must find a branch, an overhanging branch. Ewan forced his neck high to catch a glimpse of the riverbank and saw in the distance a clump of trees. This was his only chance to snatch at a branch and haul himself up from the current. He could feel himself tiring with the effort of keeping his clothes on his back. When he saw the arm of the branch reaching out, he lurched with his hand to grab it and cling on long enough to bring up his other arm like a trapeze artist. He pulled himself forward until he could feel the rocks beneath his plimsolls. He shivered in the moonlight as he spread out his sodden clothes. He lay in silence, listening for telltale signs, but there were only the night sounds of the forest to comfort him. Then he cut swathes of leafy shrubbery to pleat into a makeshift shelter, piled dry leaves from the forest floor onto himself, and rubbed himself back to life. Perhaps he might tickle some trout for breakfast, he mused wryly. This was no joking matter. He was back at square one, alone, behind enemy lines. He was far from the coast, with no proper papers. All that was going for him was a cursory map in his head, animal cunning, and a better grasp of the lingo than before. Then there was his nose for the open sea. Not much to go on, but it would have to suffice if he wanted to see Fetri once more. Chapter 7. Fetri. As the bleak winter months dragged on with still no news of Ewan's fate, men relied more and more on the cheery presence of Sergeant Broddick and his transport crew to brighten the dullness of her routine. They would often meet at the harbour or pass each other on the roads round the island. The boys would stop the trucks for a quick cup of tea, inviting her to watch their football matches and camp concerts. Life was going on around her as if Ewan no longer existed. It was hard to cling to the belief that somewhere he was alive. The temptation was to go out, especially when there were weekly cinema screenings on offer at the base. But if Ewan was a captive now, she would not be shaming him by going out to enjoy herself. She would stay indoors and knit scarves and balaclavas, boot socks and gloves for the Sailors' Comfort Fund. Anything to keep her hands from trembling. There was no news from the Red Cross, and his commanding officer wrote a letter of condolence to Ewan's parents that duly found its way to the stone cottage at Cofetrish Bay. Min's spirits sank to their lowest at his words, but that stubborny streak inside her could not believe that Ewan would not return. She withdrew into herself, finding it harder to put on a brisk, business-as-usual mask for the troops, and took to taking long walks along the shoreline, no longer able to smile to customers behind the post office counter when people asked if there was any news of the minister's son. Even her mother was deserting her now. You have to face the truth after 9 months, McGoy. Since those sad words came to the manse, there's been not one word that he lives. It's time to be putting away your hopes and getting on with your life. There's plenty of handsome blue fish in these waters only waiting to jump into your net. I want to see you provided for like I never was. Don't waste your looks and tears over what can never be. Grief has made me an old woman before my time. Anyone can see yon young sergeant has taken a shine to you. You've changed your tune, was all she could reply. Her sadness weighed heavy. How could she even look at another man? Sometimes it felt as if the whole island was watching to see what she would do next. The coming of the handsome pilots and their bombers, the madcap Polish crews and all the staff needed to run such a huge operation was giving Fetri a ringside seat in the Atlantic theatre of war. Yet Min felt only frustrated and trapped by the restrictions imposed by her work and her mother's needs. She had so little to offer the war effort. Working in a factory did not appeal, but she desperately wanted to get off the island, away from her sad memories. Had she not promised Ewan to stay put and help in the fields with the harvest, support the community and do her bit in this small world? She was trained for little else but service. Staying on was a way of showing faith that one day he would return. By early 1944, doubt was creeping into her mind that Ewan could still be alive. Why was there no news? She walked along the beach, taking comfort from the roar of the crashing tide. How can I keep loving a man who is no longer alive? How can I mourn the loss of a love that won't go away? Where are you now? She cried into the wind as memories flooded over her. John McKinnon's words about accepting loss were ringing in her ears. Fear of being without Ewan had blinded her to the reality, shielded her from the pain of facing the truth. He was not coming back. Not ever. If he was gone, then all their promises were null and void too. Perhaps with this new year coming, it was time to take the plunge and begin a new life after all. She was earning enough to go to the mainland, to see the world across the water that once she had glimpsed so briefly and open a lifetime ago. How can you live by yourself? She wondered. Who will you turn to in a big city? A fear flooded over her, crushing any resolve to leave. Perhaps it was better to stay in case Ewan did return. Then there was always Sergeant Ken, her ever-present shadow. He was good company. He brought her parcels back from his leave. He wrote to his mother and brought photos of his family and postcards of a place called the Black Pool, with its sandy beaches and seaside fun. He would sit round the fire with Mother, or walk with Min across the Macher in search of duck eggs. He mended her tyre punctures and taught her how to maintain the van. Good old Ken. When he was on leave, she missed his honking horn at the passing places on the new tarmac road. He wrote to her, and his mother added her own invitation. Do come visit us. We've heard all about your lovely island. We'll make you welcome. A friend of Ken's is a friend of ours. He's such a good son to his mother. Min was tempted, and Mother sensed she was weakening. You could do far worse for yourself. I know he can never be a minister's son, but he has a good position and a steady way with him. His eyes mist with longing when he looks on your face. I can't think of him like Ewan. I hardly know the heart of him, Min argued, puzzled at her mother's eagerness to see her settled with a man. Don't waste your chances dreaming about what you can't have. Use what the good Lord has given you, Ailey offered. How can you say that after all those dire warnings about men only being after one thing? She argued. Aye, but once a girl's wed, then no one can shame her if she lets him have his way. A bonny lassie like you needs a ring on her finger against temptation. I'm after thinking. They were sitting in the darkness of the cottage, and Min looked around at the sooty walls and pressed earth floor, the humble furniture, longing for the space of the crannog. When I look at Ken Broddick, I see a square, honest face, muddy hair and hazel eyes. Nothing more do I feel inside but gratitude that he helps me out. She was trying to be honest. He'll be the sort of man to shower you with presents and kindness, with a pair of strong arms to protect you from the icy blast of loneliness. Do not live as I've done at the beck and call of ungrateful men. Ken's a good man. You could do far worse, Mother replied. But I don't love him. Ach, away, what's love got to do with the price of beef? Just some silly notion of our betters to make our drudgery more appetising, I'm thinking. Look to your future, my boy. I won't always be here to guide you. Perhaps it's time you made provision for our old age. Mother! She was shocked at her mother's bluntness. But how easy was the temptation to find a safe haven in a stormy sea? Once the idea lodged in her mind, it was hard to ignore. Perhaps a future with Ken in some romantic place called the Blackpool Sands would warm these cold years of loneliness. If Ewan was lost, then she didn't care much what happened. How could she ever love twice in the same way? This first love would always be the deepest and the best, but she had to be practical. Better to grab what was on hand, said her angry heart. You might as well take the best of things and live for today, not tomorrow if you want to get rid of this pain. She looked up at the little china shepherdess and boy shining on the mantelpiece. It was just an ornament. A silly, romantic ornament. It was time to put it away in a box. It looked out of place in this poor, shabby room. She must put away her mourning drabness and find some colourful stuff to wear. It was time to smarten up and get out of this dark house to make a future for herself. The courtship was brief. Ken was ardent and Min was too numb to care. Once she flashed her sparkling blue eyes in his direction, stunning him with rays of undivided attention. Dancing to his tune flirtatiously, singing duets around the piano at Kaylee's. Ken was easy pickings, caught in the spidery web of love. They kissed and cuddled in the van, but she would never take Ken near any place where she had lain with Ewan. That was sacred ground, out of bounds. Now you may go. I want to take you home to show you off to my family. We can have a right good holiday. I'll take you to Blackpool and we'll go dancing in the Tower Ballroom. She nodded without much enthusiasm. He was a distraction and she was lonely and miserable, wanting only the comfort of another man's arms around her. Any man would have done, but it just happened to be Ken. He was going to take her away from the island, and that was just what she needed to hear. But Mother had other plans. No girl of mine goes abroad on her own. It's an invitation to sin. The tongues of fettery will clang like kirk bells at such a disgrace, if you catch my meaning. Sergeant Brodick, she whispered. Then we'll make an honest woman of her before we go, and it can be a honeymoon. What do you think, Min, love? She was speechless at this sudden proposal. Mother's cunning, shocked by the speed of things. It was easy to drift into the planning of a modest Highland wedding with a high tea in the sergeant's mess. There was a tweed suit to be sewn and a veil to be borrowed, a trousseau to be found from the last of Lady Rose's oddments, the minister to be visited and Ken's leave to be sorted. Yet, sometimes, as she lay in the box bed wide awake listening to the wind howling over the roof, it was as if it was all happening to someone else, as if she no longer inhabited her own body, as if she was borrowing someone else's dream. It was too soon, warnings whispered, but she was past caring. Half a cake was better than none. She sensed that the McKinnons were relieved to see her married and away from their door. Ken got permission to marry and they made their vows before a packed kirk, with Uncle Niall home long enough to give her away one Saturday afternoon in March 1944. Clothing coupons for a two-piece tweed suit and new shoes, bought from a postal catalogue, meant there was little left for any fancy underwear. The mess put on a spread, and the islanders provided a faith supper to augment the celebrations. There was going to be another celebration when they got to Ken's house in Lancashire for all his relatives to meet his new bride. All the doubtings melted in the warmth of everyone's kindness, but still in a corner of her mind, the yearning for Ewan never went away. She should be marrying a sailor in Navy, not some airman in Air Force Blue. Yet deep in her heart, in that part that never fails to see through the fog of grief, she heard warning voices. But Min didn't want to listen within it contradicted what was going on without. The wedding night was spent chastely, in a haze of whisky fumes, sleeping in Mother's brass bed, lying shyly side by side, Ken not wanting to disturb her snoring. The boat journey ferrying them south to Oban Station and on to Glasgow was rough. Min's heart went out to the darkened city so bomb-blasted and blackened by war. The smoke from the steam engines made Min sneeze. She had no eyes for her husband, when there was so much to see out of the carriage window. On the second night of the honeymoon, Min lay wide awake listening to strange city sounds, afraid of the crowds and the darkness. They were staying overnight in a boarding house, in a street of tall tenement houses, where the roar of trams and motorbikes, drunks shouting and singing underneath their window, kept them awake all night. Ken dozed fitfully, bitten by fleas, and Min was covered with red lumps. Her husband woke and stretched his arm across her breast. "Come on, let's be having you." He put his hand between her thighs, and Min froze as he heaved himself on top of her and began to fumble between her legs. He moaned and muttered, "Come on, love, open up. It's all right, you're married now." "Open up what?" Min struggled, having no idea what she was supposed to do. She was tired and exhausted by the journey. She wanted to turn over and go to sleep. "Come on, it's not difficult. Let me put it inside and Bob's your uncle." Ken was trying to cajole her into relaxing as his hand was groping ever deeper into her groin, forcing her to let him inside. A spasm of terror and pain shot through her stomach like a fierce cramp, and Min screamed out, terrified in agony as all the muscles tightened their hold. "Stop! I can't! It's killing me! Not yet!" The sound of her crying had an instant effect on Ken's passion, and he rolled off her with a grunt. "What's the matter? Nerves? A few gins will see you right tomorrow. We'll try again tomorrow. No sweat." He rolled over onto his side and began to snore. Min lay rigid until the pain subsided, afraid to move in case he woke, and tried again. "What have I done?" she cried into the pillow. So this was the big it. There was something ridiculous in all this humping and bumping. She felt nothing for the stranger beside her, who was trying so hard to be patient. Would it have been like this with Ewan? The more she had tried to do her duty, the more her insides had clenched themselves tightly in a spasm of fear. Perhaps she was just tired and needed to get used to the feel of such a swollen rod of a thing poking its way inside her body. They had a whole lifetime to get used to each other, she mused, drifting off to sleep as the agony subsided. The journey south on the long black train from Central Station was exciting, crammed with troops in kilts and sailors in their jaunty uniform, all crowding along corridors as they rattled down to the borders, over mountains and fells with glimpses of the sea to the right. Then Carlisle, Lancaster, Preston, and the smoky town called Wigan, where a line of giggling girls fell on Ken with delight. He had 4 sisters and a mother hanging on his every word. It was not the welcome she had expected. There were no black pools or sands, only rows and rows of brick houses belching smoke from the chimneys, cobbled streets with lines of sooty washing hanging across the road. And they were all expected to crowd into 2 rooms. The tablecloth was covered with pies and cakes, and strange cooked meats soaked in vinegar. She had made such an effort to be polite, but Min's stomach was still churning from the long journey, and she couldn't eat her share. Only Pipkit the tripe and the pickles. She had tasted nothing like this food before, and wanted to be sick. "Waste not, want not in this house, my girl. There's a war on. Food is hard to come by, but your eggs are as always welcome even if half of them's cracked." His mother smiled wanly at her gift to the family. It had been hard to keep the present from being bumped and jostled in the crush, and Min was quickly aware that she herself was found wanting. Ken was weighted on hand, foot and finger by his family like some Arabian prince. Their hero returned from the war with his new bride in her Harris tweed suit, which they thought quaint and old-fashioned. Min was ushered into the scullery to do the chores, while Ken went out to visit school friends home on leave. He disappeared for hours, leaving her alone to face the teasing of his sisters, Ivy, Renee, Beryl and Pat. It was hard to understand their chatter. It was quick and thick and made no sense. Her English was slow and deliberate, and they roared when they heard her pronunciation. "Oh, la-di-da, when did you learn to talk posh?" They curtsied and bowed in mock salute, so Min retreated into silence, getting on with her dish drying, swallowing back the tears. The next day, Ken went out fishing and she was trudged around the town and the market stalls, Where were the open fields with hidden eggs? Their meals came from stalls and tins and boxes. Their milk came from a churn, not the udder of a soft brown cow. It was all so strange and confusing. The noise of mill hooters, siren bells, and clanging trams on rails, and the rattle of mill machinery through open windows startled her. Ken's sisters were doing war work and ammunitions at the local ordnance factory, and it was assumed Min would bring her ration book and join the family to add to the general wage packet. Min looked up in horror at this assumption. No one had said anything about her staying here in Wigan. Ken had omitted to mention that he expected her to live with his family while he returned to Fetri. Min began to shake at the very thought of being trapped in this town with strangers who were happy enough in this grey, sooty world. She could no longer hear the beat of the waves in her ear or the sound of the seabirds calling. It was hard to breathe in this acrid air. What have I done? She screamed inside. How would she survive in a foreign land with no sand and sea and salt tangle? She would suffocate in this tiny house. At least Uncle Niall's stone cottage had thick walls and room for 2 or 3. You could run straight out onto the grass or the shore and be alone with your thoughts. Min yearned for the smells of home, the peat fire, the crisp, smoky tang of flutchties and ling, the tangle of seaweed and salt. She was panic-stricken by the thought of being forced to stay behind with folk who didn't understand her. This panic seemed to make Ken's lovemaking all the more futile, for try as they might, she would not open up to him, and he banged at her until she was sore and he spilled himself over her nightdress. She felt the wetness and was repulsed by the smell of him sweating over her. Why hadn't she been warned of this nightly shame? What if she so displeased him that he left her behind? She must take no chances and keep him interested in her body enough to want him to keep her by his side. All the arguments she rehearsed in her mind like a prayer. You know, I have a mother to support. She needs me to see to the vegetable plot until Uncle Niall returns from sea. I still have my canteen work and there are jobs even for married women until the men return. I must go back with you. In desperation, she found that if she shut her eyes and stimulated Ken by hand, he found release and pleasure. It was the best she could offer, but it made her feel soiled and left out. Strangely, no mention of her staying on in Wigan came up for discussion. To her relief, his family were just as silent on the matter once they had examined her closely and found her wanting. She overheard Ken's mother discussing her with a neighbour over the backyard wall while smoking a cigarette. She may be a looker, but believe me, Elsie, she's a queer thing. Live like peasants they do up there, Ken tells me. She's no idea how to use the mangle, the dolly. They must throw their washing over the hedges like tinkers. And all her clothes are hand-stitched and so old-fashioned. I think Ken's wondering what he's taken on, to be honest. He's only taken her out the once to the pictures. I'll be glad when his leave is up and she's out my hair. And she looks down her nose at us. Have you heard her speak? You'd think she was the Queen herself. I'm disappointed. To be honest, I thought she'd be bringing in a wage packet. But she's that thick she'd never catch on in the mill. Min found herself smiling with relief at his mother's words. I'm safe. Ken went to book the tickets north and she packed up their belongings. She bought gifts to take home for Mother, material from the cotton market. If this was the mainland, she never wanted to set foot on it again. Where were the corncrakes and the seagulls, the wild flowers? How she was longing for her little boxed bed and the sound of the gales whistling through the marram grass roof. She would never turn her nose up at Fetri again. Then she looked at the band on her wedding finger with a sickening heart. You've made a terrible mistake, she thought, as the back of Ken's head popped up from the bolster, and shuddered. He's just an ordinary working man in uniform, a man who expected his wife to behave like his mother and sisters. In Fettray he'd seemed dashing and full of promises. Here he was just like all the others. The two of them had nothing in common. "You don't love this man," she croaked. "You never did. But you're stuck with him now, Min Mohoy. You made this bed of nails. Now you must lie on it." Thank goodness Ewan was not alive to see her stupidity. She blamed the war for their difficulties. It had brought men like Ken and his crew to the island. Without the war, their paths would never have crossed, and deep down she knew it was never going to work. Never. Ever. They came from two separate worlds. On the boat home, she was gripping the handrail eagerly for the first sight of the long island. How could she pretend that this was not some living nightmare? It was wrong to have encouraged him, let alone married him. Was their marriage over before the honeymoon was ended? Doomed to death in the houses of women. My dour house full of ignorance, and his full of giggling women who laughed at my country ignorance. They had looked at her as if she'd come up river on a biscuit tin. If only she'd been left to grieve for Ewan in peace. If only she'd trusted her instincts and held firm. But in weakness, she'd married the first man who'd looked at her twice. Even she knew enough to know that love on the rebound was a dangerous liaison. Perhaps on Fettray it would be different. I must play my part and be a good wife. For better or worse, I've made my promise, she resolved. I owe it to Ewan's memory to let go of things and welcome Ken into my arms. Arms. Chapter 8. Kilfetrish Harbour, October 1944. The SS Hebrides left Oban Harbour early in the morning, steaming up the Sound of Mull, and the rocky islands laden with seals and their pups, with wet skins glinting in the sunshine, past the stern outline of Duart Castle, and up the channel flanked by familiar purple hills, sailing towards Tobermory and Ardnamurchan Point. The airmen, unfamiliar with the Western Islands, hung overboard watching the sheer waters skim over the waves, throwing their rations to seagulls. Ewan watched them with amusement. It would be a long crossing for them. Smooth at first, then the poor sods would be retching over the side. Some of the airmen sat smoking, playing cards, while officers sat below drinking cocoa and reading the Oban Times. He sat in the fresh, cool air, half nodding with exhaustion, jerked awake by the excitement of giving everyone in Fettray a surprise at his sudden return. One moment he was in mortal danger. The next he had been scooped up from France, debriefed and offered a pass for 3 weeks' leave. He had almost made it a year earlier, when he had taken the escape route down to the Brittany coast, down the line to the Gulf of Morbihan, where there was a resistance group of gendarmes at Vannes who could get him out to the Scilly Isles. But the group had been smashed long before he got within sniffing distance of the port. There was no choice but to head back and take his chance with the Maquis. It was his duty to fight on until news of liberation was no longer a rumour, and he linked up with the regular army, which screened him and sent him on his way back to report for duty. It all happened so quickly, and now he was going home. He couldn't wait to see their faces when he strolled off the ship. He had so much to tell them about his escape, and the brave men and women who had kept him alive. How, in the bitterness and grimness of war, he had discovered his artistic talent, developed his eye for detail and clinical observation, and honed his drawing technique. Once the war was over, he knew what he would be doing with his life. As long as he lived, he would owe a debt of gratitude to France, its landscape, and the brave people who had sustained his wounded spirit and given him hope. It would take many lifetimes to repay this debt of honour. So many images were racing through his mind, but the face of Min McPhee was foremost, imprinted like a signpost calling him home, His muse when holed up in shacks and caves. He couldn't wait to hold her in his arms. Now the ship was swinging round into the open waters of the Atlantic, where the familiar dark outlines of the island known as the Dutchman's Cap came into view. The sea was rougher and the engines switched gear, puffing smoke like signals into the sky. Nearly home, he sighed to himself, suddenly wide awake. This was the last lap, ploughing headlong into the autumn swell before his beloved island came into view. Fettrie was flat and long, a brilliant emerald and silver in the summer light. Now it would be grey and windswept. It hadn't the hilly grandeur of Skye or the ruggedness of some of the inner isles, but far out on the horizon, these other islands shimmered as a backdrop. As they chugged ever closer, hugging the coast, he saw some of the men rolling from side to side. One poor chap was spilling his guts over the side. "You okay?" said Ewan, picking up his slithering kit bag. "I shall never get used to this bloody hellhole," said the sergeant. "You on leave?" He was looking at Ewan's battered naval uniform. "You'll be used to this then." "You could say that," Ewan smiled. "Back to the base for you?" "Back to visit the wife," came the reply. Ewan was going to ask if he knew the family, but the ship juddered, sending everyone flying. It was going to be touch and go if they managed to land in Kilfetrish harbour. To be so near and yet so far. It was almost worth the risk of jumping overboard and taking a chance in the waves, but that would be stupid. They would ride the waves until the sea calmed and edged their way into the little port. He must be patient. Already the groups were gathering by the jetty. Sandy, the Polis, Dan the Boo, transport for the base and the post. Was Min still delivering mail around the crofts? It was so good to be home. "What's up with you now? That man of yours is not coming back for long. You should be away down to meet the ferry, like the hammers of hell." Mother was watching over Min's marriage like a hawk, sensing the wind of discontent, chunnering into her knitting. There was not enough yarn to knit another pair of socks to line airmen's boots that they sold alongside their eggs from under the counter of the mobile canteen. Min shrugged her shoulders. How could she explain to her unwed mother just how miserable marriage was turning out to be? How trapped she felt to be saddled with a man she had never really loved. How guilty she felt to have let everyone down by her physical revulsion of his body. Ken was fast losing patience with her inability to make love properly, jeering at her reluctance with disgust. "Are you a witch? Taking away my manhood with your chuckter spells." There was a bitter edge to his voice now when he spoke to her. She was glad when he was transferred back to the mainland transport depot, now that there was a build-up of troops going south. Ken wanted to be sent over to France, but his bouts of asthmatic wheezing spoilt any chance of an overseas posting. Fettrie was as abroad as he was going to get. As their marriage failed, so his wheezing seemed to be getting worse. The gaps between his leave visits grew from cracks into chasms. Each time he returned, hoping for some miracle when he stormed her fortress, but it was as if her whole body froze and tightened against him. Her teeth were clenched as he tried to approach her with a kiss even, his breath reeking of whiskey and desperation. If only there was someone whom she could confide in. But any whisper of physical contact between a man and woman, however married, was not a subject even to be discussed with the doctor. There was no one at the canteen whom she felt she could talk to. The girls were cheery conscripts, out for a good time and a laugh. She was not part of their gang. It was such a terrible shame, and she felt such a failure. Sometimes after another night of arguments, she rose early in the darkness and took herself to Ardnag Point, to the rocks that had dashed out Agnes's life. If only she had the courage to throw herself into the sea. They said that drowning was quick. What was there to live for here? She cried out to the moon and the water, Is this my punishment for a hasty marriage to a man I cannot love? What am I to do? There was never any answer, but sighs from the sea. Ken never took her back to Wigan on leave. The very thought of that house and those sisters with their prying eyes made her shiver. Sometimes he would sneer at her. I think you wanted out of this dreary place. That's why you married me, isn't it? You just wanted some poor sucker to whisk you away on a white horse to this palace. But you were too posh for Wigan. My mam was right about you. All you're after is a meal ticket. Well, you and your mother can rot here for eternity for all I care. I've had about enough of this malarkey. Believe me, there are plenty of lasses willing and able to dance in my arm. We should never wed. His last letter had stung her to the core, for in some ways every one of his words was bruising and honest. Ken Broddick was a comforting arm at first. A kind young man now turned bitter by her coldness. If only she was stronger. There must be something dreadfully wrong with her. Perhaps the McPhees were cursed indeed. It was all her fault that their lovemaking was a disaster, and she deserved his anger. Now, in the exciting aftermath of D-Day and the slow crawl of the Allies across Europe, the war was at last on the turn. The forces of the Coastal Command were already deployed elsewhere and winding down the aerodrome's operations. The sorties still went out each day to record the Atlantic weather, but the whole base was contracting. Soon Fetri would return to its sleepy ways and Min would find herself washed up on the shore, out of work and only half married. Even Uncle Niall, against all odds, had survived. He would return to his armchair by the fireside. The future was looking bleak. Perhaps she should make one more effort to revive their marriage, seek help from the doctor and try to make the best of her lot. Ken had tried his best after all. Now it was her turn. Divorce was out of the question. Min wrote one last conciliatory letter, pleading with him to come back one more time and promised to talk over her difficulty with old Dr. Murray, however embarrassing she would find it. She promised to try and please him and be a good wife. There must be a future for them on the mainland away from the sad memories, she argued. His reply was prompt and more hopeful. He gave her the date for his next leave. Min dressed carefully in her tweed suit and best hat on that fine October morning when she would go down to the harbour and wave the ship such a welcome home. At first the SS Hebrides bobbed over the horizon like a puff of smoke. Soon it was looming larger, lurching over the rough water, and the usual crowd gathered with trucks and carts while the seagulls screeched and the wind howled and tore at her skirt, whipping her hat up and away across the harbour. The troops were hanging over the side, Air Force Blue with a sprinkling of khaki and navy waving at anything that moved, and laughed as she chased her hat right into a puddle. Min's heart was thudding at the thought of Ken's arrival. She must be warm and generous. He had gone out of his way to return to her. He hated the sea and would be queasy with the motion of the steamer ploughing through the waves. The men were coming down the gangplank, and then she saw him, and her heart stopped in horror. He was walking down the gangplank, tall and suntanned. Time stood still as he strode nearer and nearer, grinning. Her heart was bursting at the sight of him. She had forgotten how tall Ewan was, how dark and how handsome. He was coming towards her, his cap plonked jauntily on the back of his head. How many times had she dreamt of this moment, cried in her dreams for this moment, prayed for this moment? Ewan had come back from the dead. Min's eyes were wide with terror, as if she had seen a ghost. Min, my darling Min, how could you be waiting for me? I've dreamt of this day for so long. Ewan flung down his kit bag and raced towards her, lifting her up and flinging her around and round again. Dearest heart, I'm home at long last. I wanted to surprise you all, but the news had flown before me. Min, let me look at you. You've no idea how good it is to see you. Dear heart. Min stepped back dizzy. Ewan do. Oh, Ewan, we thought you were dead, but you're alive. Oh, God, you're alive. They wrote to your parents. I saw the letter. It's nearly 2 years since we heard from you. Oh, Ewan, why have you come back now and not a word from you for 2 years? Min edged away from him with tears streaming down her face, bumping right into Ken, who was hurrying to rescue her from the unwanted attention from some randy sailor. Is this chap bothering you, love? Ken had seen all the action from the gangplank. No, this is Ewan, my old friend Ewan too, returned from the dead. I'm sorry, Ewan McKinnon. This is Sergeant Kenneth Broderick, my husband, she said, spitting out each syllable slowly. The two men eyed each other up warily. Not McKinnon, the dead fiancé, said Ken, and Min nodded, not able to look either of them in the face. Oh, dearie me, sorry, old chap. Tough luck. You may have been the old boyfriend, Lieutenant, but she's my wife now, so kindly keep your mitts off her in future. I'm the one that does the handling of her. Ken was staking his claim, and Min saw Ewan blanch as his words struck home, his eyes flitting to hers for confirmation. It's true, said Min wearily. We've been married over a year. I was told you drowned at sea and there was no hope. I'm sorry. Ask your father, or did they know all along of your coming? It was a rush job, Ewan shook his head, spluttering, hardly able to take in her words. I thought I'd give you all a surprise. I thought you all knew I was holed up in France behind enemy lines. The resistance said a message would get through. It obviously didn't. I'm so sorry. There was an awkward silence. Min spoke softly, seeing his distress. I don't know what to say. You've been hidden all this time. How could you be so cruel not to send word and put us out our misery? Do you expect us to believe that no one knew you were alive? Ewan, there's nothing to be done, is there? What can I say? You'll have to excuse us now. Ken's on short leave. We've a lot to catch up on too. I'm sorry, Ewan, but 2 years is too long for silence. Min dared not look up at him, sensing the shock and hurt in his voice. This was all too much for her mind to take in, and she felt faint. All the old feelings were roaring through her body like a flood tide. He was so close, but so utterly out of reach now. We're glad that you're safe. Of course, it's a pity no one thought to inform your folks, she muttered, holding on to Ken's arm to stop her legs from collapsing beneath her. He grabbed around her waist, steering her away from the crowds who were gathering to congratulate the minister's son on his safe return. She dared not look back, sickened by the cruel fate that had torn them apart, stumbling across the harbour grass towards the welcome waiting at the cottage door, feeling sick to her stomach. You didn't wait for him, and it serves you right, cried her heart. The whole of Colfetrish is cracking with the news of the minister's son. There's to be a service at Thanksgiving. 'Tis a pity, sure it is, and you not able to welcome him, said her mother with a shrug. You cannae milk the coo and sup its milk, that's for sure. Still, what's done is done. Min could not concentrate on anything now, for Ewan's accusing eyes kept flashing into her mind. All she knew was that they must speak again in private. She had to explain her actions to him in private. It was all so unfair, she cried. If only she hadn't written to Ken, begging him to come one more time. Ken was infuriating, trying to pretend that nothing momentous had happened, that Min had no feelings for the sailor and could carry on as if she hadn't been swung in his arms. To him, it was simple. She had promised to be his proper wife. But now it was worse than ever. There was no hiding the joy when the maid from the manse brought the letter requesting that Ewan should have a private meeting with Min. But Ken was furious. I'm not letting my wife be seen out alone with another man. It's not on, Min. I know he was your fella and him being a prisoner and all, but Lord love a duck. It's just not cricket. He can't just take up where he left off. Ken was studying the note brought by the minister's maid. For once, Mother stepped in to defend this unusual action. Now, laddie, the poor man was away at the war. It's no his fault his messages get all twixt up now, is it? The ways of the Almighty is strange nowadays. They two have things to be explaining to each other. It is said he's to away abroad again, and the minister has organised this meeting, so there's no saying against it. I shall take my knitting and walk with them, so none of you can say that they were up to no good, now can they? Ken shook his head, unconvinced. I suppose so, but we're not wasting any precious leave in argy-bargy. An hour. It can all be said in an hour, surely. And then I want you home. He ordered as if his wife was his corporal. Ewan and Min stood side by side at the end of the harbour jetty, looking out to sea while Ailey McPhee sat on the wooden memorial bench, knitting socks on number 3 needles. In sight, but out of earshot of the couple. I had to see you one more time, to know you're happy in your new life. Ewan spoke formally, as if he was talking to a stranger. Min was searching for an honest reply, but the words were choking in her throat. I waited a year. I knew in my heart that you weren't dead. I was the only one who wouldn't give up hope, but your father... I wouldn't believe what I was told. Not for many months. Life goes on, your father preached to me over and over again, so I took a chance with Ken. Has he made you happy? Your eyes look lifeless and sad to me. Ewan was peering into them closely, so Min lowered her gaze. Things could be better. This surprise hasn't helped either of us. Ken is jealous. I'll not be hanging around for long. I'm going overseas again. Now that... Oh, Min, if only my message had got through. What a mess. All those broken promises. How I've let you all down. He was trying to explain about his escapes, but she was not taking any of it in. Min stayed silent, then whispered, At least your mother must be dancing with joy at the sight of you. She has not been a well woman since you were gone. Not that you'd notice. She can't believe it's me. She holds back from the touching of me. And while I thought we'd be standing at the pulpit together, you and I, my own father, married you off to a Sassenach. If only. Ewan punched the air with his fist. If only doesn't help any of us, Ewan. I don't know what to say. This is agony for me too. Why? You know why. To have you so close and know we'll have to part soon. Never to kiss or touch as we used to do. I'm going to have to walk away from you back to Mother, but I just can't bear the thought of it. She was trying not to cry. I asked if you were happy. I know now you're not. You don't love that Ken, and I can't bear to think of his hands over you in that bed. It's not right, he said. No, it's not right, and it's never been right between us. Not ever. I hate it, but I'm married now, and that's that. We'll just have to make the best of it somehow. The sooner you're away from Fetri, the sooner both of us can start afresh and leave these yearnings behind us. Our time's nearly up. Mother is waving. Let her wait. I'm so sorry, Megoy. Ewan turned again and stared her full in the face. I've not given up hope yet. If you need me, you know where you'll be finding me. There must be something we can do to ease this hurting. There's nothing, Ewan. Not now, not ever. It's all too late, my dear heart. How can I be walking away from you? But I must. Wherever you go, you'll never be out of my heart, I promise. It's the only promise I can keep for you. Bye the now. Min turned from his face to speed back to the Tullach bar and the bench where her mother rose up to greet her. Well? Well, what? All that's needed to be said has been said. Time to go before Ken is champing at the bit, thinking we've eloped to Gretna Green on the high tide. Come on, there's nothing here now. Min turned her face into the wind, trying not to cry. In truth, she didn't care a jot what her husband was thinking. Her heart was dead and she would never care for anyone again.